It was just another busy afternoon at the airport. Emma had just finished her shift briefing and was now standing behind the check-in counter, checking her phone for any updates. The usual airport hum of announcements, baggage being moved, and people rushing to catch their flights filled the air. It was routine, predictable, and for the most part, uneventful. Emma was still adjusting to her new job. She had been working at the airport for only a few weeks, but already the steady flow of passengers and the seemingly endless protocols had become a part of her daily life. She wanted to make a good impression and prove that she could handle whatever challenges came her way. But there was always this nagging feeling, this subtle pressure to be perfect. The thought of making a mistake, especially in such a public setting, lingered in the back of her mind. That was when it happened. A man walked up to the VIP lounge entrance, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't look like the kind of person who would attract attention. He wasn't dressed in a flashy suit or anything that screamed celebrity, just an average guy who seemed like he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Emma, busy with her tasks, didn't think twice. According to airport protocol, only passengers with specific clearance could enter the VIP lounge. This was standard procedure, and Emma, determined to do her job right, immediately moved toward the man. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice polite but firm. "I'm afraid you can't enter the VIP area without the proper access pass." The man paused for a moment, lifting his head slightly, but didn't say anything. He simply nodded, as if understanding. Emma assumed he was just another traveler who didn't realize the rules, so she motioned toward the door, indicating that he would need to leave the area. She didn't think much of it. After all, she had dealt with passengers who didn't know the rules before. It was part of the job. The man quietly turned around and walked away, without saying a word, his presence fading into the sea of bustling passengers. Emma went back to her work, but something about the encounter felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it didn't feel like a typical interaction. Her gut was right. It wasn't until about 15 minutes later, when her colleague Maria casually walked past, humming a tune, that Emma heard the name. "Did you see Keanu Reeves earlier?" "I think he's in the lounge again," Maria said with a grin, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Emma froze. Keanu Reeves? The Keanu Reeves? Her heart dropped to her stomach. She had just kicked Keanu Reeves out of the VIP lounge. The realization hit her like a freight train. She quickly grabbed her phone and opened social media, her eyes scanning the feeds. And there it was, photos and tweets flooding in from people who had just witnessed the incident. The man she had asked to leave was indeed the famous actor. She stood there in shock, frozen by the sheer awkwardness of the situation. How could she have not recognized him? He was a world-famous movie star. But the baseball cap, the casual attire, the low-key demeanor, he didn't look anything like the action hero or movie icon the world knew. The worst part? She'd just sent him away as if he were any other passenger. Emma felt a wave of panic surge through her. She had made a mistake, a huge one, and it wasn't just any mistake. It was the kind that people would talk about for days, the kind that would make headlines. Her mind raced, and she found herself hoping against hope that Keanu Reeves wouldn't make a big deal out of it. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew that was wishful thinking. As she looked around, Emma noticed several of her colleagues quietly whispering to each other. She could feel the tension building as the story spread. She had no idea how she would face this now. And then, just as she thought things couldn't get worse, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from her best friend, Claire. "I can't believe it. Keanu Reeves was just kicked out of the VIP area. Did you hear about that?" Emma sighed. Yes, I did." The rest of Emma's shift passed in a blur. The world outside seemed to keep moving at its usual pace, but for her, time had slowed down to a crawl. Every minute felt like an hour. She couldn't shake the image of Keanu Reeves turning away from the VIP area, walking off so quietly like a shadow, completely unaware of the uproar he had just caused. As she scanned boarding passes and greeted travelers, Emma's mind kept returning to the same question. Why didn't I recognize him? She had seen his movies, of course. Who hadn't? But the version of Keanu she'd encountered today didn't look like the suave, iconic action hero or the lovable guy everyone adored. He looked like any regular person. And honestly, with all the madness of the airport, he hadn't exactly stood out. At least not to Emma. Still, no amount of rationalizing could calm the anxiety gnawing at her. The whole thing was eating her up inside. She tried to distract herself by focusing on the usual tasks, sorting luggage tags, helping passengers with questions, and making sure everything ran smoothly. But each time she looked up, she felt like everyone in the airport was staring at her. The whispers seemed louder now, the eyes colder. She glanced over at her colleague, Maria, who was busily checking a list of departing flights. Maria shot her a sympathetic smile but didn't say anything. Emma could tell that she already knew what had happened. Word travels fast in an airport, especially when celebrities are involved. And then, there was the dreaded phone call. The phone rang in the break room, the sound startling Emma from her thoughts. She quickly grabbed the receiver, hoping it wasn't someone calling to confirm what she already feared. News outlets would be all over this. "Hello?" she answered, her voice shaky. "Emma, it's Steve," came the voice of her supervisor, Steve, sounding unusually serious. "We need to talk." Her stomach twisted. She hadn't even thought about what Steve might say. She took a deep breath before responding, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course, Steve. Is everything all right?" "Not really," Steve replied, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. "We need to have a meeting about what happened earlier. Can you come to my office as soon as you're done with your shift?" "Sure. I'll be there," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. She set the phone down slowly and stood motionless for a moment, trying to hold back the growing tide of panic that threatened to swallow her whole. When her shift finally ended, Emma walked to Steve's office with heavy feet. Each step felt like she was walking toward her inevitable fate. She thought about Keanu. What if he was upset? What if he had already complained? What if her career at the airport was over before it even started? Steve was sitting at his desk when Emma entered, looking over a stack of papers. The office was quiet, with only the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Steve looked up from his desk and gave her a nod. "Emma, have a seat." She sat down, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her chest. "Now, about what happened earlier," Steve began, his voice calm but measured. It's a bit of a mess, but I want to hear your side of things first. Tell me what happened." Emma took a deep breath. She had to be honest. There was no other way. "I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't recognize Mr. Reeves, and I thought he was just some random passenger trying to sneak into the VIP lounge. So, I asked him to leave. I didn't even think twice." Steve nodded slowly, not interrupting her. Emma's heart raced as she continued. "I had no idea who he was at the time. I thought he was just another guy. I should have handled it better, but I didn't. And now it's all over social media, and I don't know what to do." There was a long pause. Steve didn't say anything right away, and Emma began to wonder if she'd said too much. Finally, Steve leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Look, Emma, we all make mistakes. The important thing is what you do next." He glanced at his phone, where he'd been checking updates. "The thing is, Mr. Reeves hasn't made a big deal out of it. He hasn't complained, and from what I can tell, he's even found a bit of humor in it. The last thing we need right now is for this to spiral into something it doesn't need to be." Emma blinked, surprised. "You mean, he's not angry?" Steve shook his head. "Not that I know of. In fact, the guy's kind of a legend for staying low-key. I've read some of the tweets. He made a joke about it. The public's eating it up. They think it's hilarious." Emma's mind was spinning. Was this real? Had she really just asked Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, to leave the VIP lounge? And now, it was all turning into a kind of joke? She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "Here's the deal," Steve continued. "This is a tricky situation, but if you can handle it with grace, it might actually blow over. We can't let it escalate, so let's keep the press out of it for now. If Mr. Reeves doesn't mind, we won't make a big fuss. But you'll need to apologize, publicly and professionally. And don't worry, I'll back you up on this." Emma nodded, relief flooding through her. She hadn't expected Steve to be so calm about it. Maybe this wasn't the end of her career, after all. "Just make sure you approach it the right way," Steve added, giving her a pointed look. "And remember, If we play this cool, we might just turn it into a positive. But, Emma, just be careful. Don't let this slip-up define you. It's all about how you bounce back. As Emma left Steve's office, her mind was still reeling, but one thing was clear. She had a chance to make this right. She would have to find Keanu. She would have to apologize. And she would have to face the world after what had just happened. But maybe, just maybe, this would turn out to be the most unexpected chapter of her life. The next morning, Emma arrived at the airport with a knot in her stomach, her mind still racing over everything that had happened. As she entered the building, the usual hustle and bustle seemed louder today. Passengers were rushing to their gates, luggage was being wheeled to and fro, and the sound of overhead announcements filled the air. But for Emma, everything felt out of sync. She couldn't escape the constant reminder of her blunder. The whispers, the jokes, the viral tweets. It was like the entire world knew she had kicked Keanu Reeves out of the VIP lounge, and they all thought it was hilarious. Every time she walked past someone who was staring at her, she felt her heart sink a little more. Trying to shake off the nerves, Emma focused on her task for the day, helping passengers with check-in, sorting baggage, and doing her best to get through the shift without drawing too much attention to herself. But in the back of her mind, there was only one thought. What if Keanu comes back today? And then, it happened. A couple of hours into her shift, Emma's supervisor, Steve, came over to her, his expression unreadable. He leaned in slightly and whispered, "Keanu's back." Emma's stomach dropped. Keanu? Her heart skipped a beat. Was this her second chance? Was he here to confront her, to call her out on social media? Or worse, get her fired? Where? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper, panic rising in her chest. VIP lounge, Steve replied. I'm not sure what his intentions are, but he's definitely here. You should go talk to him. Now. Emma's legs felt like jelly as she made her way toward the VIP lounge. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that this was it, her moment to apologize, to make things right. Keep it cool. Don't panic. Just be yourself, Emma. As she approached the lounge, she noticed a small crowd gathered near the entrance. A few passengers were snapping photos, their phones raised high, while others were staring in disbelief. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced over at Steve, who gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she walked up to the group of people, trying to push aside the anxiety that was threatening to swallow her. She could hear faint murmurs, comments about Keanu's unassuming appearance and how normal he looked. No one was quite sure whether he was there on business or just passing through. What they all agreed on was that he wasn't acting like a typical movie star. And then she saw him. Keanu Reeves was sitting in one of the plush chairs in the lounge, his hands resting casually on his lap, looking completely at ease. His baseball cap was still pulled low, but now it was clear it was him. She couldn't believe it. This was the man she had asked to leave the VIP lounge, and now here he was, sitting just a few feet away from her. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or cameras. In fact, he looked more like a regular traveler than an A-list actor. But there was no mistaking him now. His quiet presence radiated a calm confidence, and somehow, seeing him again made her feel even more nervous. Taking another deep breath, Emma approached him. Her palms were sweaty, and she could feel her heart beating in her throat, but she had to do this. She couldn't run away from it. "Mr. Reeves?" Emma said, her voice a little shaky, but she quickly cleared her throat and tried again, a bit stronger this time. "Keanu?" Keanu looked up at her and smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with a warmth that was completely unexpected. "Hey," he said casually, as if they had just bumped into each other on the street. "How's it going?" Emma froze for a moment. This was it. This was her chance. I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry for what happened yesterday," she stammered, her words coming out in a rush. "I didn't recognize you, and I made a mistake. I shouldn't have asked you to leave. I've been feeling terrible about it, and I just want to apologize. I hope you can forgive me." Keanu raised an eyebrow, his smile never wavering. He didn't look angry or upset. In fact, he looked more amused than anything. "Oh, don't worry about it," he said, his voice calm and kind. "It's honestly not a big deal. I was just here to catch a flight, but I didn't expect this much attention. People seem to think it's hilarious." Emma blinked, surprised by his easygoing response. She had been bracing herself for some kind of confrontation, or worse, some cold, cutting remark. But instead, he was making light of the whole situation. You're not mad?" Emma asked, still in disbelief. He shook his head. "Mad? No. Honestly, I think it's kind of funny. I've been in situations before where people don't recognize me. It's part of the gig, I guess." He chuckled lightly, and Emma couldn't help but relax a little. "You weren't being rude or anything. It was just a misunderstanding. No harm done." Emma let out a relieved breath. For the first time since the incident, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Keanu wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. In fact, he was completely at ease with the whole thing. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I didn't expect you to be so understanding. I really appreciate it." Keanu smiled again, his eyes warm. "It's all good. I've had worse misunderstandings. Don't sweat it." And just like that, the tension between them seemed to dissolve. What had started as an awkward, potentially career-ending moment had now turned into an unexpected interaction that Emma would never forget. As she turned to leave the lounge, her heart still racing but now filled with gratitude, Keanu called out after her, "Hey, Emma." She turned back, surprised he remembered her name. "If you ever need help with anything, like, I don't know, dealing with a celebrity sighting mishap or something, just let me know," he said with a grin. "I've got your back." Emma's face flushed, a mix of embarrassment and appreciation. "I'll definitely keep that in mind. Thank you again." Keanu waved her off, already sinking back into his chair, as if the whole incident had been nothing more than a passing moment. But for Emma, it was a turning point. She had feared the worst, but Keanu had made it clear that he didn't hold a grudge. If anything, he had handled the whole thing with a level of grace that she admired. And now, for the first time in days, Emma felt like she could breathe again. For the next few days, Emma couldn't shake the surreal feeling that had settled over her. The memory of the encounter with Keanu Reeves replayed in her mind like a movie she couldn't stop watching. How could it be that someone so famous, someone with the kind of star power that could easily dominate the headlines, had been so calm, so understanding? It wasn't what she'd expected at all. She had anticipated anger, even a little humiliation. She had expected to be reprimanded, or worse, to have her reputation shattered. But instead, Keanu had taken the whole thing in stride, like it was just another day in the life. His kindness and easygoing nature were a sharp contrast to the anxiety that had been consuming her. It made her realize something important, that things weren't always as big of a deal as they seemed in the moment. As the days went by, the incident seemed to fade from the headlines. Social media buzzed with jokes about the VIP lounge mishap and the way Keanu had taken it all with such grace, but it had quickly turned into a harmless viral moment. The public seemed to appreciate how down-to-earth and humble he had been. In fact, many people were now praising him for being so chill about the whole thing. Emma, on the other hand, was still processing everything. She had learned a lot from that one mistake. For one thing, she had learned that it wasn't the end of the world to mess up. People could be forgiving, and sometimes the things we think are the most embarrassing or catastrophic could just turn into funny stories later on. That afternoon, she was working at the check-in counter again, this time with a much lighter heart. The usual chatter filled the air as passengers approached, but she was no longer fixated on the idea of making a mistake. She knew she had made one already, and she had survived it. As she handed a boarding pass to a young couple, she noticed a familiar face walking toward her. It took her a second, but then she realized who it was. Keanu Reeves, once again, stepping into the airport. Her heart skipped a beat. This time, though, the feeling was not one of panic or dread. No, now she felt calm, even a little excited. Keanu's presence no longer felt like a looming threat. He was just another traveler passing through, and after their last interaction, Emma felt like she could handle this. "Hey, Emma," Keanu said as he approached, offering her a small but genuine smile. His voice was warm, just like it had been in the lounge. "Keanu," she greeted him with a smile of her own. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Yeah, I'm back for another flight. he said casually, leaning against the counter. Got a couple of things to take care of. You know how it is. Emma nodded, feeling a little more at ease now. I thought you'd be swarmed by fans by now. Keanu chuckled. Nah, I like to keep it low-key. I'm just here to get from point A to point B without too much fuss. Though I gotta admit, I didn't expect this to be such an eventful stop. Emma laughed, and for a moment, it felt like they were just two people talking, nothing more. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just a normal conversation between two people who had shared a strange experience. So, she said, gathering her thoughts, I just wanted to say again how grateful I am that you were so understanding the other day. You really turned a disaster into nothing. Keanu waved off her gratitude with a smile. It was no big deal, really. I mean, mistakes happen. No one's perfect. Besides, I'm used to people not recognizing me in public. It happens more often than you think. Emma was surprised by his humility. I think that's one of the reasons people like you so much. You're so down to earth. Keanu shrugged nonchalantly. I guess I've learned not to take myself too seriously. Life's too short for that. He paused, then added with a smirk, besides, I've made my share of embarrassing moments too. But that's a story for another time. Emma chuckled, relieved that the conversation was going so smoothly. They talked for a few more minutes about flights, travel, and the oddities of airport life. There was no mention of the viral incident, and Emma was grateful for that. The last thing she wanted was for things to get awkward again. Instead, Keanu's calm presence seemed to make everything feel normal. Before he left, Keanu smiled and handed her a small card. Here, he said, just in case you ever need something. I know people sometimes can be a little too enthusiastic in airports, and it might help to have a backup plan. Emma looked down at the card. It was simple, a number with a note that read, if you ever need help or just want to talk, I'm here. Below it, there was a small message, Keanu. She stared at the card for a moment, not quite sure what to make of it. But one thing was clear. Keanu's kindness had completely disarmed her. What had started as a potentially career-ending mistake had somehow led to an unexpected friendship of sorts. As Keanu walked away toward his gate, Emma couldn't help but smile. He was right about one thing. Life's too short to take too seriously. Sometimes, you just had to roll with the punches, admit when you were wrong, and try to learn from the experience. For the first time in a while, Emma felt like things were finally falling into place. She had survived the worst moment of her career, and somehow, it had turned into a valuable lesson, one that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. And as she slipped the card into her pocket, Emma realized something even more important. Sometimes, life gives you second chances. It's what you do with them that matters. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind for Emma. She tried to focus on her work and keep a low profile, but the ripple effect of her infamous encounter with Keanu Reeves continued to linger in the air. It was a story that everyone at the airport seemed to know by heart now, and while most people had moved on, a few passengers still made jokes about it whenever she checked them in. Some would even ask if she had kicked anyone else out of the VIP lounge lately. But despite the awkward moments, Emma had found a sense of peace. She wasn't embarrassed anymore. In fact, she felt stronger, more capable. Keanu's kindness and casual approach to the whole thing had taught her a lot about not sweating the small stuff and realizing that sometimes, life is just one big, unpredictable adventure. Still, she hadn't expected things to take another turn. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Emma was working at her usual post, helping passengers with check-ins. The airport was its usual busy self, with people rushing to make their flights, children dragging stuffed animals behind them, and tired travelers scrolling through their phones as they waited for their boarding calls. Emma felt the familiar rhythm of her job, the routine comfort of it. But then, something unexpected happened. The phone on her desk rang. She answered it quickly, assuming it was just another passenger asking for assistance. Hello, this is Emma. There was a brief pause before a smooth, familiar voice came on the line. Hey, Emma. It's Keanu. Her heart skipped. She sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. Keanu? Is everything okay? She asked, trying to sound calm, though inside she was already panicking. Yeah, everything's good. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Keanu's voice was relaxed, as if they were continuing an old conversation, but there was a slight hint of amusement in his tone. No, not at all, Emma said quickly, her mind racing. What's going on? I know this is going to sound a bit random, Keanu continued, but I was wondering if you were free sometime soon? I'm in town for a few days, and I thought I'd extend a little invitation. There's this charity event happening tomorrow evening, nothing fancy, but I'd love it if you could come. Emma blinked, her mind trying to process his words. A charity event? You're inviting me? She asked, her voice wavering with disbelief. Keanu laughed softly. Yeah, I know it's kind of out of the blue, but I wanted to thank you for how you handled things. Honestly, you made a huge impression with how you owned up to that whole situation. Plus, I thought it'd be fun to just hang out without all the crazy crowds. Emma felt a wave of warmth wash over her. He really wanted to thank me? She could hardly believe it. It wasn't just that he was offering an invitation. It was the fact that someone like Keanu Reeves, who could hang out with anyone, had remembered her and wanted to do something nice. I don't even know what to say, Emma managed, a little breathless. That's incredibly generous of you. Are you sure it's not a mistake? Not at all, Keanu replied. It'll be a relaxed event. There won't be any cameras or anything, just a chance to enjoy the night and support a good cause. So, what do you say? Emma glanced around, her mind still processing what was happening. The last few weeks had been a blur, and now this? She could barely believe it. But then again, she had learned a lot in the past month. Sometimes you just had to say yes to the unexpected. I'd love to, she said, her voice growing more confident. I'll be there. Thank you so much for the invite. Keanu's voice brightened. Great. I'll have someone send you the details. It'll be fun. And hey, I'll see you there. See you there, Emma echoed, still in a bit of disbelief as she hung up the phone. She sat there for a moment, her hands still resting on the receiver, trying to wrap her mind around what had just happened. Keanu Reeves had just invited her to a charity event. It wasn't the kind of thing that happened every day. And yet, Emma felt an unexpected sense of excitement bubbling inside her. Sure, it was unexpected, but maybe it was the sign she needed. She had gone through a rough patch after that embarrassing moment in the VIP lounge. But now, things seemed to be shifting in her favor. The next evening, Emma found herself standing outside a modest, upscale venue in the city, a small art gallery that was hosting the charity event. It wasn't the type of glamorous gala you saw in movies, but it had a warmth to it. The lights were dim, casting a cozy glow on the sleek interior. People were mingling, chatting over drinks, and the atmosphere was laid back, far from the high-pressure world of paparazzi and red carpets. Emma felt a little out of place at first, unsure of what to expect. She was just a regular airport staff member, after all, not someone used to mingling with celebrities or attending charity galas. But as soon as she stepped inside, she felt a wave of comfort. Keanu's invitation had been genuine, and she could tell he was trying to make sure she felt welcome. She looked around the room, scanning for him, when she spotted him across the room, talking with a group of people. He looked just as down-to-earth as she remembered. No airs, no pretense. Just Keanu. He waved at her from across the room, a friendly smile spreading across his face. Emma, he called, making his way toward her. Emma's heart fluttered a bit as he approached. Hi, Keanu, she greeted, a little more nervous than she intended. I'm glad you made it, Keanu said warmly, taking a step back to let her settle in. I wasn't sure if you'd come. First time at one of these events, right? Emma nodded, still feeling a little out of place. Yeah, it's a little outside my comfort zone, but I'm glad I came. Thank you again for inviting me. No problem, Keanu replied. I'm just glad you're here. I know it's not exactly a Hollywood gala, but I think you'll find this one's more about the cause than anything else. They continued talking, and before long, Emma felt herself relaxing. The evening went by in a blur of easy conversation and laughter. Keanu introduced her to a few of his friends, many of whom were involved in different charitable organizations, and Emma found herself connecting with people who shared her interests. By the end of the night, Emma was surprised at how comfortable she had felt. What had started as a nerve-wracking experience had turned into an evening she wouldn't soon forget. Keanu had been as down-to-earth and thoughtful as she'd hoped. And as they said their goodbyes, Keanu gave her a warm handshake, his smile genuine. "Glad you came, Emma. Hope to see you at more events like this," he said. "I'd like that," Emma replied, smiling. And as she left the event that evening, Emma realized how much had changed for her. From the moment she had asked Keanu to leave the VIP lounge, to the unexpected apology and now this, she had grown in ways she never expected. The encounter had set her on a new path, one that was filled with surprising connections and opportunities she could have never imagined. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, and she couldn't wait to see where life would take her next. In the days following the charity event, Emma felt like her life had taken a turn she wasn't quite prepared for. The unexpected invitation from Keanu had opened up a new chapter in her world. It wasn't just about the event itself, or the fact that she'd gotten to hang out with him and some of his friends. It was the feeling of possibility that seemed to follow her now. As she returned to her usual routine at the airport, she couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in how people treated her. Her coworkers, who had once laughed behind her back or made small comments about her Keanu moment, now seemed more respectful. There was a new air of curiosity about her, like she had somehow gained a new level of social currency by being associated with the actor. And while it was strange at first, Emma quickly realized that the change wasn't just external. It was internal, too. The way she saw herself had transformed. She had always been the type to shrink back when she felt like she didn't belong, but something about this experience had helped her stand a little taller. If Keanu could be so down-to-earth and unaffected by fame, why couldn't she adopt a little of that same calm confidence? One morning, about a week after the event, Emma was working a quieter shift at the check-in counter when she received a message that made her freeze. It wasn't from a passenger, but from Keanu himself. "Hey Emma, I know this might be a bit random, but would you be interested in collaborating on something? I'm involved in a project that's focused on mental health awareness, and we're looking for people with unique perspectives to share their stories. I think you could add something important to the conversation." The message was brief, but Emma felt her heart race. She read it twice, then stared at the screen for a long time, not sure what to think. She hadn't expected to hear from Keanu again, let alone be asked to be a part of something so personal. Mental health was a cause that resonated deeply with her. She had struggled with anxiety for years and had only recently started seeking help. But the idea of sharing her own story publicly was intimidating. She wasn't a public figure. She didn't have the kind of experience that could inspire a movement. But then again, she realized, maybe that's exactly why they wanted her. Keanu had seen something in her. Maybe he saw a bit of herself in her, someone who had learned to rise after falling, someone who was still learning, still growing. She didn't hesitate for long. She typed back a response. "I'm definitely interested. Thank you so much for thinking of me. Let me know what you need from me." The next few days were a whirlwind. Keanu's team contacted her to schedule a meeting, and soon, Emma found herself in a small studio with a camera crew, getting ready to share her story. She was nervous, terrified, really, but Keanu was there, making her feel at ease. He wasn't the celebrity she had imagined he would be. He was just Keanu, genuine, kind, and easy to talk to. As the cameras rolled, Emma spoke about her journey with mental health, how she had struggled with anxiety and self-doubt, and how she had found strength through unexpected places, like the time she accidentally kicked Keanu out of the VIP lounge. "It sounds silly now," Emma said, "but it taught me a huge lesson. It taught me that life isn't always as big or as dramatic as we make it out to be in our heads. Sometimes you make a mistake, and you just have to own it and move forward. And that's what I'm trying to do, move forward, despite everything." Keanu sat beside her, nodding along, and then added his own thoughts about mental health, how he had witnessed many people struggle with it in the entertainment industry, and how important it was to start the conversation. "We all face challenges. It doesn't matter who you are. What matters is that we talk about it," Keanu said. And what Emma's saying is exactly that, taking those steps, no matter how small, and learning to forgive yourself. The session felt intimate, real, and though Emma was nervous at first, she began to realize how healing it was to speak her truth, to acknowledge the struggles that had shaped her and made her who she was today. When the project was released, it gained significant attention. Keanu's involvement alone drew thousands of people, But Emma's story resonated deeply with viewers. It wasn't just her association with Keanu that caught their attention. It was her raw honesty. The video went viral, but not in the way Emma had expected. It wasn't about the scandal of the VIP lounge anymore. It wasn't about her mistake. It was about her strength and resilience, her journey from feeling small and insignificant to realizing that her voice, her story, was worth sharing. Emma received messages from strangers all over the world, thanking her for her openness. Many of them shared their own struggles, their own fears. For the first time, Emma realized that her experience, her vulnerability, had connected with people in a way she hadn't imagined. She wasn't just a behind-the-scenes airport staff member anymore. She was someone who had made a difference, even if only in small ways, by sharing her truth. And that meant more to her than anything. But there was another surprise waiting for her, one that would change the course of her journey even further. One evening, as Emma was wrapping up her shift at the airport, she received a call from Keanu. This time, his voice sounded different. There was a note of excitement in it. "Hey, Emma. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing after the video went up. It's been great seeing how much people are connecting with your story. Honestly, I'm still processing it all," Emma admitted, laughing nervously. "It's been overwhelming, in a good way, but I never thought it would go this far." "You should be proud," Keanu said warmly. "You've helped a lot of people by just being yourself. You're doing something important." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you. It means so much coming from you." Keanu paused for a moment, as though considering something, and then said, "Actually, that's part of why I called. There's another project I'm working on, a big one, and I think you'd be the perfect person to join. It's still in the planning stages, but I wanted to see if you'd be interested in being a part of it." Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. "Wait, what kind of project?" "It's still a bit early to say, but it involves giving people a platform to share their personal stories and struggles," Keanu explained. "A way to continue the conversation, bring more attention to mental health, and maybe help change some perspectives. But I think you'd be amazing at it. You've got a voice that people can relate to." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was bigger than anything she had imagined. She had gone from an anonymous airport worker to someone who was not only making an impact but was now being asked to be a part of something much larger. I'd love to," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm honored." Keanu chuckled softly. "Great. We'll be in touch soon. I'm excited to see what we can do together." As Emma hung up the phone, she felt a rush of emotions. She had started this journey thinking her life would remain static, nothing more than the day-to-day grind of airport work. But now, she was standing on the edge of something much bigger, something that could not only change her life but could help others in ways she had never imagined. And for the first time in her life, Emma was ready to embrace it. The weeks following her conversation with Keanu were a blur of excitement, anticipation, and a fair amount of anxiety. Emma found herself navigating the unfamiliar world of media and public speaking, all while trying to keep her job at the airport and maintain a semblance of normalcy. It wasn't easy. The transition was sudden, and sometimes she found herself questioning whether she was in over her head. But Keanu's unwavering support and encouragement kept her grounded. The project Keanu had mentioned, an initiative focused on mental health and personal storytelling, was moving forward faster than Emma had anticipated. There were meetings, phone calls, and brainstorming sessions with a team of people who had worked on similar projects, some of them high-profile celebrities, others mental health advocates. Emma was being introduced to this new world with open arms, but it still felt overwhelming. She had always been the kind of person to avoid the spotlight. Being an airport staff member meant she was behind the scenes, working quietly, unnoticed. But now, the spotlight was on her. The messages, the media inquiries, and the people reaching out to her. It was all coming at her in waves. At first, Emma wasn't sure how to handle it. She wasn't used to people looking up to her, or considering her a role model of any kind. She didn't feel like she deserved it. After all, she was still the girl who had accidentally kicked Keanu Reeves out of the VIP lounge. How could that person, the one who'd made such a huge mistake, now be someone people admired? But slowly, Emma began to realize something important. People weren't looking to her because of perfection. They were looking to her because of her vulnerability, her authenticity. It was her willingness to share her imperfections that had connected with people. And that was something powerful, something that could inspire change. The next big step came when Keanu invited her to join him for an event in Los Angeles. It was a panel discussion on mental health, with a focus on breaking the stigma surrounding mental health struggles. The panel would include some major players in the industry, actors, musicians, and mental health professionals, along with a few personal stories. Keanu had told her that he believed her story could have a significant impact. But it wasn't just about the panel. The event would be broadcasted live, streamed online to an audience that spanned across the globe. The moment Emma received the invitation, she felt her stomach drop. The thought of speaking on stage in front of thousands of people, many of whom were watching her from the comfort of their own homes, felt like a leap she wasn't sure she was ready to make. The closer the event drew, the more Emma felt torn. She wasn't someone who thrived in public speaking. She wasn't used to sharing her personal life with the world. Yet, at the same time, she knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a difference. Keanu had been a constant source of support during this time. He checked in on her, encouraged her, and made sure she had all the resources she needed to feel prepared. Every time Emma expressed her fears or insecurities, he calmly reassured her. "You've got this," he'd say. "You're not alone. You're sharing something important, and people will listen because they know it's real." With his encouragement, Emma finally decided to do it. She would speak. She would step into the spotlight, even if it scared her. The day of the event arrived, and Emma found herself standing backstage, her palms sweaty and her heart racing. The venue was packed with an eager audience, and the energy in the air was palpable. The sound of people chatting and preparing for the panel created a buzz that made the nerves in Emma's stomach grow tighter. Keanu had already gone out to greet the crowd, and Emma was waiting for her turn to join him on stage. She could hear the faint hum of the audience's applause as Keanu began speaking, his voice smooth and calm. Emma took a deep breath and glanced at herself in the mirror backstage. She looked like someone who belonged here, someone who had a voice that needed to be heard. As her name was announced, Emma walked out to the stage, the spotlight hitting her like a wave. Her breath caught in her throat as the audience erupted into applause. It was surreal. She was the one they were applauding. Keanu was standing there, waiting with an easygoing smile, looking every bit the professional he was. He gave her a reassuring nod as she took her seat next to him. "Thanks for joining us today, Emma," he said, his voice warm. "Thanks for having me," Emma replied, still feeling a bit shaky but determined to hold it together. The conversation began with a few questions about mental health and how it had impacted the panelists' lives. As Keanu shared his experiences, Emma listened, nodding along. His openness had always made her feel more comfortable, more willing to open up herself. When it was her turn to speak, Emma felt the weight of the moment. This was real. This was happening. She cleared her throat and began. "I've always been the type of person who tries to stay out of the spotlight. I work in an airport, checking people in, making sure everything goes smoothly behind the scenes. But last year, I had a moment that really changed everything for me." She smiled nervously as she continued. "You may have heard about the time I kicked Keanu Reeves out of the VIP lounge. And while that might sound like a funny story now, it was actually one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I thought it was the end of my career. But in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't going to let this mistake define me. I wasn't going to let one bad moment make me feel like I wasn't worthy of success or happiness." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Emma felt the weight of their attention, but instead of shrinking under it, she leaned into the moment. "I've struggled with anxiety for as long as I can remember," Emma continued. "There were times when I thought I wasn't good enough, when I felt invisible, like no one would ever see the real me. But what I've learned is that vulnerability is powerful. Sharing your story, your struggles, your failures, your wins, it helps you connect with others. And that's how we heal. That's how we change the conversation." Keanu smiled at her from across the stage, his eyes filled with pride. "That's what it's all about," he said. The conversation continued, and Emma found herself opening up even more than she had expected. She wasn't just telling her story. She was connecting with the audience in a way that felt empowering. People were responding to her, nodding in agreement, applauding her honesty. By the time the event ended, Emma felt like a different person. She had stepped into the spotlight and survived. She had shared her story, her truth, and in doing so, had made an impact. As the audience filed out, Keanu approached her, giving her a warm hug. "You did amazing, Emma. You were incredible up there." "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I could do something like that. I was terrified." "That's the thing about fear," Keanu replied with a grin. "It's not about not being afraid. It's about doing it anyway." And in that moment, Emma realized that he was right. Fear didn't have to hold her back. She could be scared and still move forward. And that was exactly what she planned to do from now on. The weeks after the panel event were a whirlwind of change for Emma. She was still trying to digest everything that had happened, from the applause at the event to the overwhelming number of messages she'd received afterward. It wasn't just people praising her for her bravery, though that was part of it. It was the stories of how her words had impacted them, how they felt understood, less alone, or inspired to take their own steps toward healing. The feedback was humbling. She had become something she hadn't expected, a voice for people who were grappling with mental health issues, who were searching for validation in their struggles, who were tired of feeling invisible. The unexpected spotlight had given her a platform she never dreamed of, and despite her initial hesitation, she had begun to realize how much this role meant. She wasn't just sharing her story for herself. She was doing it for others who felt like she once had, lost, misunderstood, and isolated. Her role at the airport, meanwhile, hadn't changed much. She was still working the check-in counters, making sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. But the airport had become a place of reflection, a symbol of her past. It was where she had started, where she had been just an ordinary staff member, hiding her own struggles behind a uniform and a smile. Now, she found herself seeing the passengers differently. She saw them as people who might have their own silent battles. It gave her a sense of connection with the world she hadn't had before. Her coworkers also seemed to view her in a new light. The whispers behind her back were gone. Instead, they were more respectful. Some of them even seemed a little in awe, as if they couldn't quite believe that Emma, who had once been just one of them, was now becoming a voice for change. It was strange to walk through the terminal now, knowing that her face had been on TV, that her story had been broadcast to thousands of people. But with all the new attention came new challenges. Emma was adjusting to the fact that people now recognized her in public. It felt like she had to always be on, as if her vulnerability was no longer just her own. The constant pressure to be a symbol of strength was overwhelming at times. She had days when she didn't feel so strong, when the weight of expectations, her own and others, made her want to retreat into herself again. Still, Keanu was there, every step of the way. Keanu's message to her had never changed. You don't have to be perfect. Just be you. That's enough. As time went on, Keanu reached out more frequently, not just for the project, but also as a friend. He checked in with her, asking how she was really doing, and he encouraged her to take breaks, to honor her limits, and to embrace her imperfections. It was this continued support that helped Emma weather the pressure. The idea that she didn't have to live up to an ideal, but could simply live authentically, was liberating. One day, after a long shift at the airport, Emma found herself sitting on a park bench near the terminal, reflecting on everything that had happened. She checked her phone, seeing another message from Keanu. "Hey Emma, I know you've been really busy, but there's something I want to talk to you about. Let me know when you're free for a call." Curious, Emma didn't wait long before she dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey, Keanu," Emma greeted him, settling into the bench. "What's up?" "Hey, Emma," he said. His tone was casual, but there was something in his voice that made her sit up straighter. "I've been thinking a lot about the project we're working on. It's been amazing so far, right? The response has been incredible." "Yeah," Emma replied. "It's still surreal. I can't believe how much people have connected with what we're doing." "I know," Keanu said, his voice softening. "I was thinking, maybe it's time for the next step. You've done so much already, but I think you're ready for something bigger. I want to offer you a chance to lead the next phase of this initiative. We'd be bringing in more people, expanding the conversation on mental health in a big way. What do you think? Emma's heart raced. The thought of leading the next phase was both thrilling and terrifying. Leading meant even more responsibility, more exposure. Could she handle it? You want me to lead it? Emma asked, her voice a little breathless. But I'm still figuring things out. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that. Keanu's voice was steady and kind. I've seen what you've done already, Emma. You've already inspired people. You've shown that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to keep moving forward. I think you're more than ready for this. The words were both reassuring and daunting. Emma's mind raced, considering the possibilities. To be a leader, to truly step into her power and take this initiative to the next level. Could she really do it? I don't know, she said slowly. It's a huge responsibility. I get it, Keanu said. It's a big step, but I believe in you. And I think you'll inspire even more people than you already have. No one expects you to be perfect, Emma, but I think you can do amazing things with this platform. Emma sat quietly for a moment, thinking about everything she had learned. She had started out as a person who didn't feel good enough, who thought she had to hide her flaws. Now, she had a chance to help others see that they, too, could step into their power, flaws and all. I'm in, Emma finally said, her voice steady. I'll do it. Keanu let out a relieved laugh. I knew you would. Let's get started. As Emma hung up the phone, she felt a rush of emotions. Excitement, fear, anticipation, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. She had come so far since that day she kicked Keanu out of the VIP lounge, never imagining that it would lead her to this point. But here she was, on the verge of taking the next big step in her life. And this time, she wasn't going to hide from it. She was going to lead. She was going to take charge. She was going to show up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Because Emma knew now, she belonged. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face whatever came next. It had only been a few days since Emma had agreed to take on the leadership role for the mental health initiative, but already, she could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on her shoulders. She wasn't just sharing her story anymore. Now she was expected to guide a team, inspire change on a larger scale, and keep the momentum going. It was no longer just about her. It was about all the people who were counting on her to help shift the conversation on mental health. The next morning, Emma sat in her apartment, sipping her coffee as she stared at the notes she had jotted down. There was a long list of things to do, emails to send, meetings to schedule. It felt like she was stepping into a world that was much bigger than she had ever imagined. She had moments of self-doubt, wondering if she had made the right choice or if she was truly cut out for this. But deep down, Emma knew one thing. This was her chance to make a difference. She wasn't going to back down. Keanu had already arranged for Emma to meet with a group of mental health professionals, advocates, and influencers who were passionate about the cause. They would help guide the next phase of the project, and Emma was expected to lead the discussions, set the agenda, and decide on the direction the campaign would take. It felt overwhelming, but the excitement kept her moving forward. The first meeting was scheduled for the following week in Los Angeles. Emma couldn't help but feel a little anxious about it. She had spent so much time working in the background, doing things that didn't require much attention or leadership. Now, the world was watching, and the pressure was mounting. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, Emma found herself standing outside the conference room, feeling the familiar nervous energy building up in her chest. She checked her reflection in the glass doors, running a hand through her hair. She had dressed carefully, business casual, professional, but still comfortable. But no matter how much she tried to prepare, the nerves didn't go away. You can do this, she whispered to herself, trying to calm her racing thoughts. As the door opened, she stepped inside and was greeted by a diverse group of people. Some in suits, others in more casual attire, but all of them with a shared passion for the cause. Keanu was already there, sitting at the head of the table, a familiar face that immediately made Emma feel a little more at ease. He smiled warmly as she entered. Hey, Emma. Glad you could make it, Keanu said, standing to greet her. Everyone, This is Emma, our new project lead. She's going to take this initiative to the next level." The room erupted into applause. Emma felt her cheeks flush with a mix of surprise and gratitude. She wasn't expecting that kind of reception. "Thank you, everyone," Emma said, taking a seat at the table. She cleared her throat and tried to steady her nerves. "I'm really excited to be here, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to lead this project. I know there's a lot of work ahead, but I believe in the power of this initiative. I believe in the power of sharing our stories and in breaking down the stigma around mental health." There was a murmur of agreement around the table. People were nodding, smiling, and already getting into the spirit of collaboration. "We're all behind you, Emma," one of the mental health professionals, Dr. Allen, said. "We've seen how your story has impacted so many, and we believe you're the right person to take this to the next level." Emma smiled, grateful for the support, but also feeling the weight of their expectations. She knew that this was a huge responsibility, but as the meeting went on, her confidence started to build. The ideas that were bouncing around the room were exciting. There was so much potential: new ways to engage the public, to use social media as a platform for awareness, to collaborate with other organizations, and to bring in real stories from people across the world who had struggled with their mental health. As the day went on, Emma found herself leading discussions, taking notes, and offering input. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was where she was supposed to be. It wasn't easy. There were moments of uncertainty, times when Emma wasn't sure if she was making the right decisions. But with each passing hour, she grew more comfortable in her role. Keanu watched her closely, offering encouragement when needed, but letting her take the reins. He had always believed in her ability to lead, and today, he saw that belief come to life. By the time the meeting wrapped up, Emma felt like she had taken a giant step forward. The team was energized, everyone was aligned on the goals, and they had already outlined the next steps. It was going to be a lot of work, but it was going to be worth it. "Great job today," Keanu said as they stood up to leave the conference room. "You handled everything like a pro." Emma couldn't help but smile. "Thanks. I don't know if I would have made it through without the support of everyone in that room." Keanu gave her a reassuring look. "You've got this. You were born for this." Over the next few months, Emma threw herself into the project. There were late nights, countless phone calls, and endless brainstorming sessions. She found herself juggling her job at the airport, the project, and her personal life, sometimes barely keeping it all together. But with each passing day, she felt more confident in her role as a leader. She had built a team that shared her passion and vision, and together, they were creating something that was already making waves. The initiative grew quickly, with new partnerships forming, social media campaigns gaining traction, and even public figures joining in to share their own stories. Emma's story was just the beginning. Now, people from all walks of life were coming forward, eager to share their experiences with mental health, and it was clear that the conversation was shifting. The stigma was starting to crack. One evening, as Emma sat at her desk, reviewing the latest updates, she received a message from Keanu. It was simple but filled with meaning. "I'm proud of you. We're making a difference, and it's all because of you." Emma smiled as she read the message. It wasn't just the project that had changed her. It was the journey. She wasn't the same person who had nervously kicked Keanu out of the VIP lounge. She was someone different now. Someone who had learned to embrace her imperfections, to lead with vulnerability, and to make an impact in the world. And as she sat there, looking at the progress they had made, Emma realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was still long, but she was no longer afraid to walk it. She was ready. The months that followed the launch of the Mental Health Initiative were both exhilarating and exhausting for Emma. She was constantly juggling her newfound responsibilities, leading the project, managing a growing team, responding to the endless messages of support and inquiry, and still working her shifts at the airport. The momentum of the project was like a tidal wave, pulling her along, sometimes too fast to process. Yet, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of purpose with every step she took forward. As the project gained more attention, the media buzz increased. Interviews, articles, and social media posts poured in. Some days, it felt like Emma couldn't keep up with it all. But despite the chaos, she felt more certain of her path than ever. The message she was helping to spread, that it was okay not to be okay, that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness, was something that resonated deeply with people. But as with any major shift, there came challenges. And not all of them were external. One evening, after a particularly draining day of meetings and interviews, Emma sat alone in her apartment, staring at the emails piling up in her inbox. She felt her eyes growing heavy, the weight of exhaustion settling on her shoulders. She opened a draft of her speech for the upcoming charity event she would be speaking at and realized it was still incomplete. Emma rubbed her temples, trying to clear the fog in her mind. She knew she needed rest, but there was so much to do. She had promised herself she would keep going, keep pushing forward. After all, this was her chance to make a difference. But then, doubt crept in. Am I really making a difference? She thought back to her initial excitement, how sure she had been when she took on this responsibility. But now, with the pressure mounting, she found herself questioning whether she was capable of handling it all. The weight of leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about carrying the hopes of so many people on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Keanu. "Hey Emma, just checking in. I know things have been crazy, but I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." She smiled, grateful for his continued support. Keanu had always been a steady presence in her life, reminding her to slow down when she needed to, and to recognize her own limits. She quickly typed back, "Thanks, Keanu. I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed today. There's so much to do, and I feel like I'm falling behind." His reply came almost instantly. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed. You don't have to do everything on your own. We're a team, and you're doing incredible work. But don't forget to breathe. You've got this." Emma sat back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. He was right. She didn't have to carry it all alone. She had a team, a strong, passionate group of people who believed in the cause as much as she did. They were in this together. Taking a deep breath, Emma looked over the emails one more time, then closed her laptop. Tonight, she was going to take a break. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling a little more refreshed. She had spent the previous evening away from work, just focusing on herself for a change, taking a long walk, reading, and even indulging in some much-needed quiet time. The first thing she did was call a meeting with her team. The project had grown, and they needed to figure out how to delegate tasks better, to ensure that no one person was carrying the burden alone. She knew that she couldn't keep up the pace of doing everything herself. The meeting was a breath of fresh air. The team was energized, and there was a palpable sense of collaboration. They shared ideas for the next phase of the campaign, ways to engage with new audiences, and strategies for expanding the initiative's reach. Emma felt her confidence grow with each passing minute. Keanu had been right. She didn't have to do everything alone. Later that week, Emma was invited to speak at a high-profile charity gala for mental health awareness. The event was being held in Los Angeles, and some of the biggest names in entertainment and advocacy would be there. It was a major opportunity for the project, but the idea of speaking at such a prestigious event made Emma's nerves flare up again. She hadn't planned on public speaking being such a major part of this journey. At first, she had done interviews, and that was manageable. But now, the stakes felt higher. She would be addressing a room full of people who had the power to make a real difference, who could elevate the project to new heights. The night before the event, Emma stood in front of the mirror, practicing her speech. Her words were there, but the nerves were still there too. What if I mess up? What if I can't inspire them? Her mind was racing, but then she took a moment to pause and breathe. She thought back to the first time she had stepped on stage with Keanu, the fear, the uncertainty, and how far she had come since that moment. "You've done this before, Emma," she whispered to herself. "You're doing this for the right reasons. Just be yourself." She could feel the familiar weight of expectation, but she refused to let it drown her. Instead, she focused on the message, not the fear. She would speak from the heart, just like she always had. The following evening, Emma stood backstage at the gala, the lights from the audience casting long shadows on the walls. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she waited for her cue to take the stage. She could hear the crowd murmuring, waiting for the next speaker. When her name was called, She took a deep breath and stepped out into the spotlight. The moment the crowd saw her, there was a brief pause, then a round of applause. Emma felt a flicker of surprise. She approached the microphone, cleared her throat, and smiled at the audience. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Thank you for being here tonight and for supporting a cause that is so close to my heart. A cause that, for too long, has been pushed into the shadows." She looked out into the crowd, gathering her thoughts. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," she continued. "I've spent much of my life feeling like I didn't matter, like my struggles weren't important. But that changed when I learned to speak up. When I learned that it's okay to not have everything figured out. It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to ask for help." The room was silent, everyone listening intently. Emma continued, telling her story with honesty and vulnerability. "This project isn't about me," she said. "It's about all of us. It's about giving everyone the courage to share their truth, to break free from the stigma, and to support each other in our journeys. Together, we can make a difference." As she finished her speech, the room erupted into applause. The feeling of relief and pride flooded her. She had done it, and this was just the beginning. After the event, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. She had spoken her truth, and in doing so, had helped others find their voice. The weight of leadership still loomed, but now, she felt more confident in her ability to carry it. She was not alone in this journey. She had a team, a cause, and a newfound strength that she hadn't realized was inside her all along. As she left the gala, Keanu caught up with her in the hallway. "You were incredible," he said with a smile. "I knew you could do it." Emma smiled back. "Thank you, Keanu. I think I'm starting to believe it too." And for the first time, she truly did. She wasn't just leading the project. She was living it, breathing it, and becoming a part of the change she wanted to see in the world. The road ahead was still long, but Emma had learned one important thing. No matter how hard it got, she could handle it. And she wasn't backing down. As the weeks passed, Emma's project continued to grow. What started as a small initiative, just an idea shared over coffee with Keanu, was now turning into a movement. The mental health awareness campaign was gaining traction, spreading across social media platforms and news outlets, and more importantly, it was starting to change lives. One afternoon, Emma sat in her office, scrolling through messages from people who had been touched by the campaign. There were stories of people overcoming their own struggles, finding the courage to ask for help, and reaching out to others. Emma was humbled and a little overwhelmed by how far the message had spread. One message, in particular, caught her attention. It was from a young woman named Sarah, who shared her story of battling severe anxiety and depression. Sarah explained that after hearing Emma speak at the charity gala, she finally decided to seek therapy for the first time in her life. She thanked Emma for giving her the strength to take that step. Emma couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's message. It was moments like these that made everything worth it. The late nights, the stress, the uncertainty. People were starting to listen, starting to take action, and that's exactly what Emma had set out to do. But even as she celebrated these successes, Emma knew there was still work to be done. The team had already started planning a national tour to raise awareness and further engage with communities. It was a massive undertaking, and there were a lot of logistics to consider: venues, travel, partnerships, and the endless details that came with organizing something of this scale. And it wasn't just the planning that was consuming her. Emma had started to feel the strain of managing so many moving parts. There were moments when it felt like the weight of the project was pushing down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her. She had a team now, but they still needed her leadership, and the pressure to keep everything running smoothly was immense. She reached out to Keanu for advice. He had been incredibly supportive from the start, but now she was starting to feel like she might need a little extra help. "Keanu, I need to talk," she texted. "I'm starting to feel like I'm running on empty. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up without burning out." Keanu replied almost immediately. "Let's meet up. I think I know exactly what you need." A few hours later, they met at a quiet cafe in downtown Los Angeles. Emma found a seat at a corner table, trying her best to push aside the anxiety gnawing at her. Keanu arrived shortly after, his usual calm demeanor a stark contrast to the restlessness Emma was feeling inside. "You look like you've been through a marathon," he said, smiling gently as he sat down across from her. Emma chuckled softly, but it was a tired laugh. "Feels like one." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes full of understanding. "So, what's going on?" Emma took a deep breath, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I don't know how to say this, but I feel like I'm losing control. The team is great, but the bigger this project gets, the more I feel like I'm falling behind. I'm constantly playing catch-up. I've been working so hard, and yet I feel like there's always more to do. I can't keep up." Keanu listened carefully, nodding along. "That's a heavy load to carry, especially on your own. You're trying to manage a movement, a team, and your own life. It's a lot for anyone, even you." "I just don't want to let anyone down," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "People are counting on me, on this project. It means everything to so many people, and I don't want to fail them." Keanu's expression softened, and he reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Emma, you're not alone in this. I know it feels like you have to carry everything, but you don't. Your team, they're there to support you. And more importantly, they look up to you. But you also need to take care of yourself. You've been pushing so hard for so long, but you can't pour from an empty cup." Emma nodded slowly, her eyes beginning to water. "I know you're right, Keanu. I don't know how to step back without feeling like I'm letting everyone down." Keanu gave her a warm smile. "Stepping back doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're taking care of yourself so you can be there for others in the long run. You can't be at your best if you're running on empty. It's okay to take a break, to delegate, to ask for help." Emma wiped away a tear, feeling the weight of his words sink in. "I don't know how to delegate without feeling like I'm giving up control." "That's a common fear," Keanu said. "But think of it this way. The people you've surrounded yourself with, they believe in this cause as much as you do. They've got your back. And by trusting them, you're only going to make the project stronger. You can't do it all alone, Emma. And that's okay." A wave of relief washed over her. Keanu had always known how to calm her fears, even when she didn't know how to voice them. It felt like a weight had been lifted off her chest. She had been trying to do everything herself, afraid to trust others to take on parts of the work. But he was right. She didn't have to do it alone. The next day, Emma called a team meeting and made a decision that, at first, felt like a big step back. She asked for help. She assigned new responsibilities to team members, trusting them to take the lead on certain areas of the project. It wasn't easy. Emma had always been the one to handle everything, but she knew it was the right thing to do. The results were immediate. The team thrived under the new leadership roles. They took ownership of their tasks and began bringing fresh ideas to the table. The project felt like it was running more smoothly, and for the first time in a while, Emma didn't feel completely overwhelmed. But there was something more important that happened as a result of her decision. She realized that she didn't need to carry the weight alone. She could lean on the people around her, and by doing so, they could collectively achieve far more than any one person could alone. A few weeks later, Emma found herself at the forefront of the project's first national tour. She spoke in different cities, meeting with communities, sharing her story, and connecting with people who had their own experiences to share. Everywhere she went, the same message echoed. People were ready for change. They were ready to talk about mental health, to break the silence, and to help others who were struggling. It was an exhausting journey, but it was also incredibly rewarding. Emma had learned to trust her team, to take breaks when needed, and most importantly, to ask for help. She wasn't just leading a movement anymore. She was a part of it, a part of something much bigger than herself. And as she stood on stage in front of a cheering crowd, Emma realized that the ripple effect had already begun. This was just the start. There was still so much to do, so much to change. But the first step had been taken, and it was already changing the world, one step at a time. As the national tour progressed, Emma's life began to shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. While the initiative grew stronger with each event, the attention it brought also came with a new set of challenges. What once felt like a personal mission had now turned into a full-fledged movement, and with that came a level of fame that Emma had never sought. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Fans approached her for photos, asking for advice, or simply expressing how much her words had impacted their lives. At first, Emma felt flattered. She had always wanted to make a difference, and now, she could see the tangible effects of her work. But as the days went on, the constant attention began to wear on her. She no longer had the anonymity she once enjoyed. When she went out for a walk, it was no longer just a walk. It was a spectacle. When she visited a cafe for a quiet moment, it wasn't long before someone would approach her to talk about the campaign. The pressure to be constantly on, constantly, Emma the advocate, was beginning to take its toll. She had always been a private person, and while she loved the positive impact the initiative was having, the glare of public attention was exhausting. It felt as if she was always on, even when she didn't want to be. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of speaking at a major fundraiser, Emma sat alone in her hotel room, staring at the piles of fan mail, social media notifications, and thank you notes that had arrived from various organizations. She appreciated the support, but it all felt overwhelming. Keanu had noticed the change in her, too. It wasn't just the long hours and constant travel. It was the emotional drain that came from always being in the spotlight. "Emma, I think you need a break," he said one night, as they caught up over the phone. "You're giving so much of yourself, and it's starting to show. I'm worried that you're burning out." Emma sighed, rubbing her eyes. "I know, Keanu. I feel like I can't escape it. Everywhere I go, I'm just on. People expect me to be this perfect advocate, but sometimes I just want to be me. I miss being anonymous, being able to step out of the spotlight for a while." Keanu's voice softened. "It's okay to feel that way. You're human. You've built something incredible, but you don't have to be everything to everyone. Maybe it's time to think about how you can still have a life outside of all this." Emma took a deep breath. "I don't know how to do that. The project's become so big. I can't just walk away, can I?" Keanu paused before answering. "You don't have to walk away, but you can set boundaries. It's okay to say no. It's okay to take time for yourself." Emma knew he was right, but the thought of stepping back, of not being there every moment, filled her with guilt. She didn't want to disappoint the people who had come to rely on her. But then, she thought about the message that had first driven her to start this journey. The mental health campaign wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. And part of being real was acknowledging her own limitations. The next day, Emma made a difficult decision. She asked her team to take over more of the daily operations, and she set boundaries for herself. She would take weekends off, time to recharge, and let her team handle more of the logistics. It was a huge shift, but one she knew was necessary for her own well-being. It wasn't easy to let go of control. At first, Emma was tempted to jump back in when things didn't go exactly as planned. But over time, she realized that her team was more than capable. They believed in the mission just as much as she did, and by trusting them, she could actually focus on what she did best, sharing her story and inspiring others. As the weeks passed, Emma found that her decision to step back allowed her to regain a sense of balance. She could still be involved in the project without feeling consumed by it. She began to enjoy the moments of peace, quiet mornings, time with friends, and even long walks in the park without being constantly interrupted. And with this newfound balance, she felt more energized when she returned to the work she loved. Meanwhile, the national tour reached its final leg, and Emma couldn't help but feel a bittersweet sense of pride. The campaign had grown beyond anything she could have imagined, and people from all walks of life had rallied behind it. The media buzz had amplified, and the message of mental health awareness was now more widespread than ever. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, Emma received a call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Emma got the news. She had just finished a meeting about an upcoming partnership with a major mental health organization when her phone buzzed with an alert. It was a news article titled, "Emma Collins, Mental Health Advocate or Media Manipulation?" Emma clicked on the link, her heart sinking as she read the headline. The article, written by a well-known tabloid journalist, accused her of using the mental health movement for personal gain, questioning her authenticity and implying that she was only in it for the fame. The article quoted anonymous sources claiming that Emma had been less involved in the day-to-day operations of the campaign, implying that she was simply a figurehead. It also questioned the financial transparency of the organization, though no solid evidence was provided. Emma stared at the screen, her stomach churning. She had worked so hard to build trust, and now it felt as though it was being ripped away in an instant. Her phone rang. It was Keanu. "Emma, I saw the article," he said, his voice steady but concerned. "Don't let it get to you. This is exactly what happens when you get to this level. People will try to tear you down." "I don't know, Keanu," Emma said, her voice shaking. "This feels different. The accusations, they're making it sound like I've been lying to everyone. I can't just ignore this." Keanu was silent for a moment, then spoke again, his tone calm but firm. "You don't owe anyone an explanation, Emma. You've been real from the beginning. The people who matter, the ones who believe in the cause, they know the truth. You've helped so many people already, and you're still helping. Don't let one article define you." Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "You're right. I feel exposed. Like everything I've worked for is suddenly in question. It's a hit, but it's not the end," Keanu reassured her. "This is just one bump in the road. Keep your head high. We'll get through this together." The days that followed were tough. Emma's team worked quickly to address the accusations, providing transparency on the organization's finances and the work they were doing. They released a public statement clarifying the situation, emphasizing that Emma had always been committed to the cause and that the campaign had grown due to the collective efforts of the entire team, not just her own. But no matter how much they addressed the issue, the article lingered in the back of Emma's mind. The pressure of being in the public eye, of trying to balance her personal life with the demands of the campaign, felt heavier than ever. It was in this moment of doubt that Emma realized something important. The cause she had built wasn't about her. It was about the thousands of people who had reached out, the stories she had heard, the lives that had been changed. Yes, she had been the face of it, but she was just one part of a much bigger picture. And as she took a moment to reflect on everything she had accomplished, Emma realized that, despite the challenges and the public scrutiny, she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. It wasn't about fame. It was about impact. It was about making a difference, no matter what obstacles came her way. She wasn't backing down now. The aftermath of the tabloid article lingered far longer than Emma had anticipated. Despite the public statement from her team and the clarification of the accusations, the damage was done. Media outlets continued to buzz about the claims, and people's opinions seemed split down the middle. Some fans rallied around her, expressing unwavering support, while others, swayed by the sensationalism of the article, began to question her sincerity. Emma had spent years building her reputation as someone who cared deeply about mental health. She'd never wanted to be in the spotlight for the wrong reasons, and now she was grappling with the consequences of being thrust into it. Every social media notification felt like a small stab in the chest. Every comment, every headline, pulled her back into the same feeling of doubt and vulnerability. For the first time since starting the campaign, Emma considered stepping away, at least for a while. She could feel the weight of public scrutiny and the endless cycle of expectations beginning to suffocate her. What if people were right? What if she wasn't doing enough, wasn't doing it for the right reasons? It was a dangerous spiral, one she had always tried to avoid. But now, with the pressure mounting, it seemed inescapable. Keanu could see the toll it was taking on her, even through the phone. His support had never wavered, but Emma's distance in their conversations was becoming more apparent. She had become quieter, more hesitant, and her usual optimism was starting to fade. "Emma, I know you're hurting, but I need you to hear me," Keanu said during one of their nightly calls. "I'm not going to let you fall into this trap of doubt. You've been through too much to let one article define you." Emma let out a shaky breath. "But what if the doubts are right, Keanu? What if I've been so focused on the campaign that I've lost sight of what it's really about? I never wanted any of this. It was supposed to be about the people, not me." Keanu's voice softened, but it held a firm conviction. "You are the people, Emma. This campaign has never been about the spotlight or about fame. It's been about the stories, the lives you've touched. There will always be critics. There will always be people who doubt you, who try to tear you down. That's just part of the journey. But you need to remember why you started in the first place. You didn't do this for recognition. You did this because you saw people suffering, and you wanted to help. Emma wiped away a tear, trying to steady her emotions. I just don't know how to move forward. It feels like every step I take is under a magnifying glass. I've given everything to this, and now I'm being questioned. I don't know if I can keep going like this. Keanu was quiet for a moment. I get it, but you're not alone in this. You never have been. The people who support you, who believe in this cause, they know the truth. They know your heart. And that's what matters most. He paused, letting his words sink in. Look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It won't be. But I know you can weather this storm. And when you're ready, we'll figure out how to rebuild, how to keep pushing forward. Together. The next day, Emma took a walk through the park near her apartment. The sun was shining, and the air was crisp, but she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She had taken Keanu's words to heart. But while she knew she was capable of continuing, she also knew that something needed to change. She needed to find a way to separate herself from the noise, to focus on the core of what she had started. As she sat on a bench, staring out at the trees, Emma realized something important. She had never been in this alone. The campaign had always been about the collective, about the stories of people coming together to make a difference. It wasn't about one person carrying the burden. She didn't have to be perfect, and she didn't have to be the face of it every day. Her focus had always been on the message, on mental health awareness, and on the impact they were having on communities across the country. Maybe it was time to shift the narrative, to let the voices of the people they were helping take the lead. The idea came to her as she walked back home. Instead of constantly fighting to maintain control, maybe she could step into a new role. Emma wasn't just the leader. She was part of a larger movement, and it was time for the movement to evolve. Over the next few days, Emma and her team began to brainstorm new ways to engage with the community and give more voice to the people who had been touched by the campaign. Emma would still be involved, but the spotlight would no longer rest solely on her. They decided to launch a new initiative, Voices of Change. It would allow people who had been impacted by the campaign to share their own stories, creating a platform where everyone could be heard, not just the advocates or influencers. It was a brilliant idea, one that would take the focus off Emma and place it on the very people she had always wanted to help. The project would still carry her values, but it would allow others to lead the way, to be seen and heard. As the Voices of Change initiative took shape, Emma felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in weeks. She was finally starting to let go of the weight she had been carrying. The pressure to be perfect, to be the face of the campaign at all times, had been suffocating. Now, she was rediscovering the joy in the work, knowing that the campaign wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had joined the movement. When the first batch of personal stories came in, Emma was overwhelmed by the raw, powerful messages. People from all walks of life were opening up about their struggles, their victories, and how the campaign had helped them feel less alone. It was clear that Voices of Change was going to be a game changer, both for the campaign and for the people who had felt invisible for so long. Emma couldn't help but feel proud. She had always wanted to make a difference, but it felt like something even bigger. This was not about a single person's journey. It was about a collective effort, a shared experience, and a shared goal. As the initiative launched, the media buzz that had once been so overwhelming began to quiet down. The critics still existed, but the voices of the people drowned them out. Emma's fears of being judged and questioned faded into the background as the campaign took on a life of its own. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about the impact, the change, and the lives they were helping. Weeks passed, and the Voices of Change initiative grew even more powerful. People from all over the world contributed their stories, and the campaign became more than just a platform. It became a community. Emma realized that by stepping back, she had allowed others to step forward, and in doing so, she had created something far more meaningful than she ever could have imagined. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, doubts, and moments when Emma questioned everything. But now, as she looked back on how far they had come, she knew it had all been worth it. She had found the balance she needed, and in the process, had given others the opportunity to find their own voices. And in a way, that was the greatest victory of all. The Voices of Change initiative was gaining momentum, and with it, Emma found herself at a crossroads in her journey. The campaign was no longer about pushing her personal narrative were carrying the weight of the entire movement. It had blossomed into something bigger, a collective effort, a shared space where anyone, from any walk of life, could find their voice. But with success came new challenges. As the project expanded, Emma began to feel a sense of responsibility she hadn't anticipated. The stories she was hearing daily were powerful, stories of pain, triumph, and resilience. These stories weren't just statistics, they were real people, each one filled with unique struggles and victories. And Emma found herself carrying that emotional burden. She was no longer just advocating for mental health. She was living it, sharing in the grief, the pain, and the hope of thousands of strangers who had reached out to the campaign. Sometimes, the weight of it all felt unbearable. Emma found herself waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, haunted by the words people had shared with her. It was as if their struggles had become her own, and she wasn't sure how to carry them all. Keanu, who had been a steady source of support, noticed the change. Over the past few months, Emma had seemed more distant, her eyes constantly heavy with exhaustion. It wasn't just the work. It was the emotional toll of bearing witness to so much heartache. Keanu knew she was a fighter, but even the strongest people needed to take a step back sometimes. "Emma, you need to take care of yourself," Keanu said one evening, his voice filled with concern. "You're carrying so much. It's okay to step back for a while. You can't help others if you're running on empty." Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know, Keanu, but these stories, they're so personal. I can't just walk away from them. People trust me with their pain. How can I leave that behind?" Keanu was quiet for a moment before responding. "You don't have to leave it behind, but you also can't let it consume you. You've already given so much, but you need to remember you're only human. It's okay to take a break and recharge. This isn't a race." Emma didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sat in silence, her mind racing. Keanu's words struck a chord with her. She had been so caught up in the whirlwind of the campaign, so driven to make a difference, that she had forgotten to take care of herself. It was time to face the truth. She couldn't do it all, not alone. The next morning, Emma made the difficult decision to step back, temporarily, at least. She had built a strong team around her, and they had proven time and time again that they could handle the daily operations of the campaign without her constant presence. It was time for Emma to take a much-needed break, to allow herself the space to breathe and heal. She made a public announcement, explaining that while she would still be involved in the Voices of Change initiative, she would be taking some time off to focus on her own mental health. She wanted to set an example, not just for her supporters, but for herself. Taking care of one's mental health was just as important as advocating for it. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated her honesty, and many reached out to offer their support. Emma realized that by stepping back, she wasn't abandoning the cause. She was reinforcing it. It was a reminder to everyone that self-care wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Over the next few weeks, Emma spent more time at home, away from the constant media attention and the never-ending emails. She took long walks, read books, and even started journaling again, something she hadn't done in months. Slowly, the anxiety that had been gnawing at her began to fade. The pressure to be perfect, to constantly perform, loosened its grip. During this time, Emma also reached out to some of the people who had contributed stories to Voices of Change. She made phone calls, had long chats, and listened. It was a way for her to reconnect with the core of the campaign, to remind herself why she had started in the first place. And in those conversations, she found healing. She realized that it wasn't just the people who had shared their stories with her who needed support. It was her, too. As Emma began to heal, she found herself reflecting on her journey in ways she hadn't before. She thought about the tabloid article, the doubts, and the struggles she'd faced. It was easy to get lost in the noise, to feel as though one mistake or setback could undo everything. But as she thought more deeply, she realized that those moments were part of the process. The growth, the pain, the uncertainty, it was all part of the bigger picture. She had never set out to be a perfect advocate. She had set out to create a space where people could talk openly about their struggles and find community. And that's exactly what she had done. She wasn't perfect, and neither were the people she was helping. But they were all in this together. Emma realized that her role wasn't to carry the world on her shoulders. It was to show up, to listen, and to guide when needed. And in those moments, she wasn't just helping others, she was helping herself. By the time Emma was ready to return to the campaign, she had a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't stepping back into the spotlight, but rather, stepping into a new role, one where she could continue to make an impact without sacrificing her own well-being. The team had kept the initiative running smoothly during her time away, and the Voices of Change project continued to grow. Emma was able to take on a more strategic role, working behind the scenes to shape the direction of the campaign and support her team. She found new ways to engage with the community, launching virtual town halls and creating more interactive platforms for people to share their stories. The most important lesson Emma had learned during her time off was the power of balance. She didn't have to be everywhere at once. She didn't have to do it all herself. And in finding that balance, she became a more effective leader, one who was stronger and more centered than ever before. As the months passed, Emma watched the campaign flourish. Voices of Change was no longer just a movement. It was a global community, united by a shared commitment to mental health and well-being. Emma had found her place in it, not as a figurehead, but as a guide, a listener, and an advocate for all those who needed to be heard. In the end, it wasn't the headlines or the public recognition that mattered. What mattered was the impact they were making, the lives they were touching. Emma had created something real, something that would continue long after the media frenzy had died down. And as she looked back on her journey, she realized that every twist, every turn, every challenge had led her to this moment, a moment where she was exactly where she was meant to be. This was only the beginning. As Emma settled into her new role within Voices of Change, the campaign's reach continued to grow. It was becoming a global movement, transcending borders and cultures, and sparking crucial conversations about mental health and self-care. What had started as a small initiative to provide a platform for those struggling with mental health issues had now turned into something far larger, an ongoing dialogue that was shifting the way people thought about mental well-being. Emma's role had shifted as well. No longer was she the sole face of the campaign, but rather, she had become the quiet force behind it, guiding its direction and helping to create an environment where others could take center stage. She had learned that leadership didn't always mean being in the spotlight. It was about creating the conditions for others to shine. One afternoon, Emma received a message from a woman named Sarah. She had written her story for the Voices of Change initiative months ago, sharing her painful experience with depression and the ways in which the campaign had helped her find the courage to seek therapy. Emma had read her story, of course, but this new message was different. Sarah was writing to let her know that she had recently become a mental health advocate herself. She was hosting local support groups for people dealing with mental illness, providing a safe space for them to talk and heal. The message was short but powerful. I wouldn't have done any of this if I hadn't found the courage through your campaign. It gave me the strength to speak up, and now I'm helping others do the same. Thank you for showing me it's okay to not be okay. Emma stared at her phone screen for a long moment, feeling a deep sense of pride and fulfillment. It wasn't just the fact that Sarah had found her voice. It was that Sarah had gone on to inspire others to do the same. The ripple effect of the campaign was spreading, creating waves of change that Emma hadn't fully anticipated when she first began this journey. Later that week, Emma spoke with Keanu about Sarah's message. They were sitting in Emma's living room, a quiet evening and after a hectic week. Keanu had been keeping in touch with Emma throughout her recovery, his support a constant, grounding force. Their friendship had only deepened over the months, and they had grown closer than ever. That's incredible, Keanu said, smiling as Emma shared the story. It's like you planted a seed, and now it's growing in ways you didn't expect. Emma nodded, looking out the window. I never thought about it like that. At first, I just wanted to help. But now, seeing how people like Sarah are taking the message and running with it, it's more than I ever imagined. Keanu's voice grew serious. That's the power of what you've created, Emma. You're giving people the opportunity to be the change. You may not be the one out front leading every march, but you've created a movement, and that's something real. Emma smiled softly, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so long questioning her own ability to make an impact, but now she understood. She didn't need to carry the burden alone. It wasn't about her. It was about the people who had been inspired to take action. The movement was never meant to revolve around one person. It was about everyone coming together to fight for a better future, one story at a time. But as voices of change grew, Emma found herself facing new hurdles. While the campaign had garnered widespread support, there were still critics who pushed back against the message. Some argued that mental health was being overemphasized, that people should just toughen up or get over it. These voices, often loud and filled with judgment, made it hard for many to feel safe opening up about their struggles. One evening, after reading through a few negative comments online, Emma felt the familiar tug of doubt creep in. Was she doing the right thing? Was she enabling a culture of weakness by encouraging people to talk openly about mental health? The thoughts swirled, but deep down, she knew the truth. People were struggling, more than ever, and silence was never the answer. Keanu, sensing Emma's unease, reached out. They spoke for hours, discussing the frustrations that came with being a public figure advocating for change. He reminded her of the bigger picture, the voices of people who had been silenced for far too long. Don't let them take your power, he urged. You're not here to please everyone. You're here to make a difference. Emma sighed, grateful for his unwavering perspective. I know. It's just hard sometimes. The louder voices always seem to get the most attention. That's because they're afraid, Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. They're afraid of the truth. And the truth is, people are hurting, and they need this conversation more than ever. If anything, the pushback means you're doing something right. Emma smiled, the weight on her shoulders easing just a little. She wasn't going to let the noise drown out the message. She wasn't going to let fear stand in the way of helping people who needed it most. In the coming weeks, Emma's resolve strengthened. She focused on the messages of gratitude and healing she received daily from people whose lives had been transformed by voices of change. She reminded herself that the campaign wasn't for the critics. It was for those who needed to be heard, those who had been quietly suffering in isolation. As the initiative expanded further, Emma made a conscious decision to share more of her own journey. She wasn't perfect, and she wasn't ashamed of that. Her struggles with mental health, her moments of doubt, and her imperfections were part of her story, and that story could help others feel less alone. One day, Emma sat down to write a post for the campaign's social media page. It was a simple message, but one that felt profoundly important. She shared a bit of her own story, opening up about the moments when she had questioned whether she was enough, whether she was doing enough. She wrote about the importance of embracing imperfection and being kind to oneself in the face of challenges. And as she hit post, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't just a leader in the campaign. She was a part of it, imperfect, real, and ever-growing. That authenticity was what connected her with others, and it was what made the movement so powerful. The response to Emma's post was overwhelming. People from all walks of life shared their own stories of doubt, fear, and triumph. They expressed gratitude for the openness, for the reminder that no one was alone in their struggles. In that moment, Emma knew that the work they were doing, no matter how challenging, was worth every second. There would always be critics. There would always be obstacles. But there would also be people like Sarah, whose lives were being changed because they had found the courage to speak up. Emma wasn't just part of a movement. She was part of something larger than herself. A ripple effect that was touching lives across the globe, one person at a time. And she knew, with all her heart, that this was just the beginning. As the days passed, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose, but also an underlying pressure. The success of Voices of Change had brought with it more opportunities, more collaborations, and an influx of stories. It was exhilarating but also overwhelming. Emma had learned the importance of pacing herself, but it was difficult when the work felt so urgent, so necessary. The movement was expanding beyond her wildest dreams, and with that expansion came new partnerships. Corporations, nonprofits, and even global organizations were reaching out, eager to collaborate. While these offers were an incredible opportunity for growth, Emma couldn't help but wonder if the core message of the campaign would begin to shift with the involvement of larger, more commercial entities. She had always been clear about her values. Voices of Change was about empowering individuals, not commodifying their struggles. It was a space for honesty, for real stories that didn't have to be polished or packaged neatly for mass consumption. That week, Emma sat down with her team for an important meeting, her mind still buzzing with the questions that had been keeping her awake at night. Keanu had agreed to sit in as well. He was now a part of the project in a more official capacity, helping to strategize and guide the vision of Voices of Change. His perspective was invaluable, and Emma trusted him to help her keep the mission intact. The meeting room was quiet as the team settled in. Emma looked around at the faces of the people she had grown so close to over the months. She knew that the stakes were higher now, that the campaign was no longer just hers to manage. It was theirs too. "I've been thinking a lot about where we're headed," Emma began, breaking the silence. "This campaign is growing fast, and with that comes a lot of opportunities. But I need to ask, what's the cost of all this? Are we staying true to our roots?" Her team exchanged glances, and Emma could feel the weight of the moment settle over the room. This wasn't just about navigating the business side of things. It was about maintaining the integrity of what they were creating. Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm yet firm. "The opportunities are great, but we need to remember why we started this in the first place. It wasn't to gain followers or sell a product. It was to create a space for people who feel unseen. And we can't lose sight of that. No matter how big we get, we need to be intentional about what we allow in." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Keanu's words had struck exactly the right chord. She needed to hear them, to be reminded of why she had started this journey in the first place. "Exactly," Emma agreed. "I think it's important that we remain selective. We don't need to partner with every company that offers us a deal. We need to find partners who genuinely care about the cause. It's not about the money. It's about the impact." The room was quiet for a few moments as everyone absorbed Emma's words. They all knew this was a turning point. They were no longer a small, grassroots initiative. They were a global movement, and with that came new responsibilities. But Emma knew that if they stayed true to their mission, they could continue to make a difference, without losing themselves in the process. Later that evening, after the meeting had concluded, Emma and Keanu took a walk around the city. The cold night air was refreshing, a perfect contrast to the intensity of the day. Keanu had been there through every high and low of this journey, and Emma was grateful for his steady presence in her life. "You know, Keanu," Emma said as they walked along the quiet streets, "I never thought it would be like this. I didn't know what it would take to run something like this. There's so much at stake now. I don't want to mess it up." Keanu smiled, his gaze thoughtful. "You won't mess it up. You've already done so much. It's easy to get lost in the pressure, but you've created something real here. People trust you because you're authentic. Don't lose that. Whatever happens, stay grounded." Emma let out a deep breath, allowing Keanu's words to settle in. She wasn't alone in this. She had a team who believed in the mission as much as she did, and they would navigate this next chapter together. As the weeks went by, Emma and her team began to focus on building new partnerships with organizations that aligned with the core values of Voices of Change. They weren't rushing into any deal or collaboration that didn't feel right. Instead, they took the time to carefully vet each opportunity, ensuring that any partnership they entered into would further the movement's goal of creating a more open and supportive dialogue about mental health. The initiative had grown beyond Emma's wildest dreams, and yet, it was still grounded in the idea that healing came from connection and honesty. Emma continued to share her own struggles with the campaign's followers, letting them see that she, too, was still a work in progress. It wasn't just about the success of the campaign. It was about continuing to build a community where people could come together and heal together. One day, Emma received another message. It was from a young woman named Mia, who had been following the campaign from the beginning. Mia wrote that she had been battling anxiety for years, and it had made her feel isolated and ashamed. But after reading Emma's posts and seeing how the campaign had helped so many others, Mia decided to take the first step in seeking help. She'd enrolled in therapy and was now part of a support group. "I never thought I'd be able to say this," Mia wrote, "but I'm starting to feel like I can breathe again. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to ask for help. You've saved my life." Emma's heart ached as she read the message. She knew she couldn't save everyone, but moments like this reminded her that she didn't have to. The movement wasn't about solving every problem. It was about creating a space where people felt safe enough to ask for help. As Emma sat back in her chair, her phone still in hand, Keanu walked into the room. He had been working late, helping strategize their next campaign push. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her pensive expression. "I'm more than okay," Emma replied, her voice soft. "I think I just needed to hear that today." Keanu smiled, walking over and giving her a hug. "You're doing incredible things. Don't ever doubt that." In that moment, Emma realized that the journey ahead was still full of unknowns. There would always be obstacles. There would always be naysayers. But in her heart, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The campaign, her team, and the countless people who had found their voices because of it. It was all more than she could have ever imagined. And for the first time in a long while, Emma felt at peace with the future. No matter where it led, she was ready to face it head-on. This was just the beginning. As the months went by, voices of change continued to evolve into something Emma had only dreamed about at the start of her journey. Yet, as it grew, so did the weight of the responsibility. Every day, Emma received countless messages, some uplifting, some heartbreaking. It seemed that every hour brought a new challenge, a new decision that would shape the future of the campaign. There were days when she felt like she was losing herself in the sheer magnitude of it all, but there were also days when she was reminded of the power of what they were creating. One morning, Emma woke up to an email that made her stomach drop. It was from a large international conglomerate, one that had been in touch several times before, but now they were offering something much larger. A partnership that would give Voices of Change the exposure it needed to go global, but at the cost of potential compromises. The deal included advertisements, sponsored content, and a significant amount of funding, but Emma knew there would be strings attached, strings that could change the way the campaign was perceived. She read the email 3 times, trying to weigh the potential benefits against the risks. The money would allow them to expand the initiative into new countries, fund more resources for mental health support, and employ a larger team to manage the growing demand for their work. But it also meant changing their approach, shifting the focus to something more polished, more marketable, and less raw. "Emma?" Keanu's voice cut through her thoughts. He had walked in, noticing the concerned look on her face. He could see she was already deep in thought about the email. She looked up at him, her voice quiet. "It's a huge offer. We could take this campaign to places we've never even imagined. But I'm scared it might change what we're doing here. It might make it less real." Keanu pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "I get it," he said gently. "But what matters is the core of what we're doing. If this company really gets what Voices of Change is all about, they won't ask you to change the essence of it. They'll just help amplify it. But if they don't understand, if they want to turn it into something commercial, then we have to be strong enough to walk away." Emma leaned back in her chair, staring at the email on her laptop screen. The tension in her chest was palpable. "I've always said this campaign is for the people. It's about helping those who need a space to talk, to feel seen. But what if by saying yes, we're giving up the very thing that makes it so special?" Keanu thought for a moment before replying. "Look at where we are now. We're already reaching people, real people, not just stats, not just numbers. We've built something that matters. If we're going to partner with someone, it has to be because they believe in that, not because they just see dollar signs. And you have to trust yourself. You'll know if it's right." Emma took a deep breath and closed her laptop. The weight of the decision was heavy, but Keanu's words grounded her. This wasn't just about the future of the campaign. It was about staying true to herself and her purpose. The next few days were filled with more meetings, more messages from other companies, and more conversations with her team. As they discussed the pros and cons, Emma realized that the decision wasn't as black and white as it had seemed at first. The world was changing, and Voices of Change had the potential to be a part of that change. But the question was, would the message be diluted in the process? In the midst of the whirlwind, Emma found herself reaching out to a few of the people who had shared their stories with the campaign. One of them, a woman named Alicia, had become a close friend over the months. Alicia had struggled with addiction and mental health issues for years before finding the courage to speak up. Her story was one of the most powerful that Emma had ever read. When Emma called her, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Alicia, I need your help," she said. We've been offered a big partnership with a corporation, and I'm not sure. I don't want to lose what we've built. I don't want to make this just about money or fame. I want it to stay real." Alicia's voice was steady on the other end of the line. "I get it, Emma. You've created something incredible. I've seen it change lives, including mine. But I think you need to ask yourself, what is this campaign really about? Is it about getting bigger? Or is it about making a difference? If you're still clear on that, then whatever happens next will be the right choice." Emma listened, taking in Alicia's words. "But what if I'm afraid? What if we lose everything in the process?" Alicia paused before responding. "If you stay true to why you started, if you keep the heart of the campaign intact, you won't lose anything. But if you compromise your mission, that's when you lose yourself." The conversation with Alicia lingered in Emma's mind as she prepared for another meeting with her team. She realized that no matter how big the campaign grew, the core of it had always been about connection, about giving people a place to heal. The campaign was not for her, it was for them. The ones who reached out, the ones who felt unseen. She wasn't about to let the campaign become something it wasn't. The meeting that afternoon was pivotal. Emma laid out her thoughts, the concerns she had about the potential partnership and the risks involved. To her relief, her team was in complete agreement. They weren't in this to create a product. They were in it to create a movement. They wouldn't allow the campaign to lose its soul for the sake of exposure or financial gain. "We've always known what this is about," Emma said, looking around the room. "We can't let that get lost. We have to stay true to the people who need us." Keanu, ever supportive, spoke up. "Whatever we do next, it's going to be because we believe in it. And if that means turning down big offers, then so be it. We're not here to sell out. We're here to make a real difference." By the end of the week, Emma made the difficult decision to turn down the partnership. It was not an easy choice, and part of her worried about what might have been. But as she sent the email, informing the company that she was declining their offer, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had stayed true to her values. The days following that decision were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The team was focused, energized, and more connected than ever. They knew that the road ahead would be challenging. There would be more offers, more temptations, but they were in this for the long haul. They were building something that mattered, and nothing would take that away. In the quiet moments after the decision, Emma thought back to the first time she spoke out about her mental health struggles, the first time she shared her story. She never could have imagined that it would lead her here, to a global movement, to a community of people who had found their voices. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Emma knew one thing for sure. She had taken the right path. The journey was far from over, and with the support of her team, the people who believed in voices of change, and the lessons she had learned along the way, she was ready to face whatever came next. This was just the beginning. The decision to decline the corporate partnership had sent ripples through voices of change. Though the team had been unified in their choice, the reality of the decision still lingered. Emma, in particular, found herself reflecting deeply. There was a certain kind of freedom in their refusal to compromise, but also a daunting sense of uncertainty about how they would continue to grow without that financial backing. Still, in the quiet moments of reflection, Emma reminded herself of the reasons they had started in the first place. It was never about the money. It was always about creating a space where people could feel seen, heard, and valued, just as they were. One evening, after a long day of work, Emma sat down with Keanu at their favorite cafe in the city. It was a small, cozy place with large windows that looked out over the bustling streets, the dim lights casting a soft glow on everything around them. They had been through a lot together, and Emma valued their time together outside of work just as much as the work itself. It was in these moments that she could breathe, where the weight of the world seemed to momentarily lift. Keanu could tell that something was still weighing on her. He watched as she absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, her eyes distant. He knew her too well to let it slide. "Talk to me," he said gently, leaning in. "What's on your mind?" Emma hesitated before speaking. "I'm just thinking about the future, you know? We've turned down a huge opportunity, and I don't know what's next. It feels like we've put all our eggs in one basket, and what if it doesn't work out? What if the growth we need doesn't come the way we hope?" Keanu nodded, his expression empathetic. "It's a lot to carry. but you've built something strong. Voices of Change wasn't just built on money or big deals. It was built on stories. And that's what matters. People are connecting with us because of who we are, not because of who's backing us. Emma let out a slow breath, appreciating the reassurance, but still feeling the uncertainty gnawing at her. I know, but it's hard. The pressure is starting to feel heavier every day. I can't help but wonder if we'll be able to keep this going without the kind of funding those partnerships could have provided. We're reaching people, but how do we reach more? Keanu's gaze softened. You're asking the right questions, and that's what matters. It's not about doing everything all at once. It's about being true to what you've built. The right people will find you. You just have to trust that your message is bigger than any paycheck. Emma smiled faintly, grateful for his presence and his unshakable faith in her. But a part of her still wasn't entirely convinced. The doubts were there, as they always had been, gnawing at her when she least expected it. I just keep thinking about all the people who've reached out to me, those who've shared their struggles, their darkest moments. How do I keep living up to that? How do I keep showing up for them? Keanu placed his hand over hers. By being honest, by staying vulnerable. That's the power of this campaign. You've never pretended to be perfect. You've shared your own story, your struggles, your victories, and your setbacks. That's why people trust you. That's why they believe in voices of change. You're not asking them to be anything other than themselves. And neither should you. Emma looked down at their intertwined hands, feeling a quiet strength in his words. Vulnerability. It had always been the heart of Voices of Change. She had built the campaign on the idea that it was okay to not be okay, that it was okay to ask for help. But somehow, in the whirlwind of growth and expansion, she had started to lose sight of that core belief. I need to be more honest with myself, Emma admitted softly. I've been so focused on trying to make everything work that I forgot to stop and listen to what's really important. I've been holding on to the pressure of success, but I haven't been allowing myself to feel the joy of what we've already built. Maybe it's time I let go of that fear. Keanu gave her a reassuring smile. You're not in this alone. We're all in this together. You've built a community of people who believe in what you're doing, Emma. Don't forget that. The following week, Emma decided to take a small, yet meaningful step toward reconnecting with the heart of the campaign. She scheduled a live stream, something she hadn't done in months. It wasn't a polished, rehearsed video. It was raw and unfiltered, just her, sitting in her living room with a cup of tea, talking directly to her audience. As the live stream began, Emma looked into the camera, her heart beating faster than usual. She hadn't done something like this in a while. There was a vulnerability in speaking to the camera, knowing that thousands of people were watching, hanging on every word. But that was the beauty of it, the connection, the shared experience. It wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity. Hey everyone, she said, her voice a little shakier than she intended. I know it's been a while since I've done one of these live streams, and honestly, I've missed this. But I also realize that I've been so caught up in everything lately, the partnerships, the growth, the pressure, that I forgot what this is really about. She paused for a moment, collecting her thoughts. Voices of Change isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up as we are, no matter how messy or complicated things get. I've been so focused on trying to make everything work, but I've forgotten the importance of just being real with all of you. You've all been with me since the beginning, and I owe it to you to be honest with where I'm at. There was a moment of silence as she let her words settle. I'm scared too. Sometimes I'm terrified that we're not doing enough, that we won't be able to keep this going. But I know that we've already made an impact. We're already making a difference. And that means more to me than any partnership or corporate deal ever could. As she spoke, Emma's anxiety began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of peace. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just speaking from the heart. The response from the audience was immediate and overwhelming. Messages flooded in, from people sharing their own struggles to others offering words of encouragement. It was a reminder that, even in moments of doubt, she was exactly where she needed to be. Later that evening, Emma shared a moment of reflection with Keanu. As they walked through the city streets, the lights flickering above them, Emma felt lighter than she had in days. I feel like a weight has been lifted, she confessed. I've been holding so much inside, trying to keep it all together. But talking to everyone today, it reminded me why we're doing this. It's not about perfection. It's about connection. Keanu smiled warmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. You've always known what this is about. It's just easy to forget when things get busy. But today, you came back to yourself. And that's the most powerful thing you can do. Emma nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It's not about having it all figured out. It's about showing up, even when you don't. As the weeks passed, Emma continued to find strength in her vulnerability. She learned that it wasn't about avoiding fear or uncertainty. It was about acknowledging it and moving forward despite it. With Keanu by her side and the support of her team, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road wasn't always going to be easy, but Emma knew one thing for certain. She didn't have to walk it alone. And that made all the difference. With each passing day, Emma felt herself becoming more attuned to the pulse of voices of change. The campaign wasn't just a project anymore. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by the stories, the struggles, and the victories of countless people who had reached out for support. It was a reminder that, despite the hurdles, the movement had never been more alive. And she, despite all her doubts, was the one steering it forward. Though the decision to turn down the corporate offer had been a tough one, it was now clear that it had been the right call. The momentum voices of change had gained in the past few weeks, especially after her candid live stream, was unlike anything she had seen before. People were sharing their stories more freely than ever, reaching out to one another in ways that felt like true community. Emma knew that, in the end, the real power was in the shared vulnerability and openness of their audience. The people needed a space to be themselves, and that was exactly what she was going to give them. One afternoon, as Emma sifted through the numerous emails and messages, one particular message stood out to her. It was from an organization that focused on mental health education, offering to collaborate on a new project aimed at increasing awareness for mental health services in underserved communities. It wasn't the large-scale offer she had declined before, but it had potential, real potential, to create lasting change in the areas that needed it most. Keanu walked into the room just as Emma read the last line of the email. She looked up, her eyes sparkling with something he hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. This might be it, she said, holding up the phone, her fingers tapping nervously at the screen. This could be the collaboration we've been waiting for. Keanu walked over and took a seat beside her. Let's take a look. As they read through the details together, the plan became clearer. The organization was focused on creating educational resources, support groups, and workshops for communities where access to mental health services was limited. They had already built a strong network in the rural areas of several states and were now looking to expand. Emma saw a huge opportunity here to bring voices of change into these areas, helping to bridge the gap between communities and the support they needed. It aligned perfectly with the core mission of the campaign. After discussing it for a while, Emma felt a rush of excitement. This is the kind of partnership we can get behind, she said, her voice steady with conviction. It's not about profit. It's about helping people who need it the most. This is what we've been working toward. Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. I agree. This feels right. You should reach out to them. Emma immediately began drafting a response. She thanked them for their interest and expressed her enthusiasm for the potential collaboration. She also made sure to emphasize that the partnership would need to be one that upheld the values of voices of change, authenticity, accessibility, and above all, the focus on real stories. By the time the next few days had passed, Emma had secured the partnership. The relief was immediate, but with that came an overwhelming sense of purpose. She was about to embark on a new phase of voices of change, one that would take them into new territories and, hopefully, impact even more lives. But with the excitement came a new set of challenges. Emma had always been used to juggling multiple tasks, but this was different. Now, she was responsible for coordinating with different teams, managing the growth of the campaign, and ensuring that the integrity of their message remained intact. The first step was meeting with the team to discuss their new role in the collaboration. Emma sat at the head of the table, Keanu by her side, as she spoke passionately about the new direction. We're not just expanding, Emma said, her voice filled with determination. We're taking the heart of voices of change to communities that have been neglected for too long. We're giving people the tools, the resources, and the space to talk openly about mental health. But we can't do it alone. We'll need to adapt, we'll need to grow, but we have to keep our core values front and center. Her team, as always, was fully on board. They understood the vision, the mission, and they were ready to take the next step with her. Over the next few weeks, Emma worked tirelessly with the new partners to build out the logistics. They brainstormed content that would resonate with these new audiences, tailored to the unique challenges faced by each community. They reached out to local organizations, schools, and mental health professionals to ensure the information they were providing was both accurate and helpful. At the same time, Emma made sure to stay connected with their audience. She continued to engage with followers, asking them for feedback on what they thought could help improve the campaign's outreach. It was the stories, their voices, that fueled voices of change, and she wasn't about to lose touch with the people who had made it what it was. One evening, as Emma sat at her desk, staring at a mountain of emails, she received an unexpected message. It was from Alicia, the woman who had become one of her closest friends through the campaign. Alicia had been a vocal supporter from the beginning, and her story had touched the hearts of thousands. Emma opened the email, reading Alicia's words carefully. "Emma, I know you've been through a lot lately, and I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for creating voices of change, but for being the kind of person who doesn't give up on what matters. I've seen so many people find the courage to speak out, including me. You've given me and so many others a voice, and for that, I'll be forever grateful." Emma sat back in her chair, the weight of Alicia's words sinking in. This was why she did it. This was why they had started. Emma hadn't been looking for recognition, but in that moment, she realized how far voices of change had come, not just as a campaign, but as a community. It wasn't about fame or money. It was about creating real connections, opening doors, and offering a space for people to heal. The weeks turned into months, and Emma saw the fruits of her labor begin to flourish. The campaign expanded into new communities, reaching people who had never had access to mental health resources before. They hosted workshops, built support groups, and created educational content that was accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Through it all, Emma never lost sight of the core values that had shaped voices of change. Vulnerability, authenticity, and connection were at the heart of everything they did. The team had grown, and with it, so had their impact. But Emma knew one thing was for sure. Voices of Change wasn't just a campaign anymore. It was a movement, and it was just getting started. As Emma sat in the office late one evening, looking over the final plans for the upcoming outreach program, she realized something profound. This journey had been nothing like she had expected, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. The challenges had been tough, but each one had helped her grow in ways she never imagined. And as she looked out the window at the city lights below, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. She had made the right choices. She had followed her heart. And no matter what the future held, she was ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, Emma was not only confident in the journey ahead, she was excited. The excitement of the new collaboration was still fresh, and the momentum continued to build. Emma, her team, and Keanu worked tirelessly to prepare for the upcoming outreach events. With each step, they were moving closer to the vision they had all dreamed of, the chance to not only expand the reach of voices of change, but to make a tangible difference in communities that had often been overlooked. One particular event loomed on the horizon, a large-scale mental health summit, where they would bring together community leaders, mental health professionals, and individuals who had benefited from their resources. This summit was not just another event. It was a symbol of everything they had worked for. It was a celebration of the resilience of the communities they had touched, and the perfect opportunity to unite people from all walks of life under a shared goal of mental health awareness and support. As the day of the summit approached, Emma couldn't help but feel a mixture of nerves and excitement. She had been to conferences before, but this was different. This time, she wasn't just attending as a participant. She was leading the charge. She was the voice of a movement that had reached people far beyond what she had ever imagined. The day of the summit arrived, and the energy in the air was palpable. Held in a large conference hall in downtown, the space was buzzing with anticipation. Emma stood backstage, taking a few deep breaths. Keanu was there, offering his usual calming presence. "You've got this," he said with a reassuring smile, as he adjusted the collar of his shirt. "This is your moment." Emma nodded, her heart pounding. I didn't expect it to get this big. I want to make sure we don't lose sight of what's important." Keanu gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You're not going to lose sight of anything. You've been grounded in this mission from the start. Just keep speaking from the heart. That's what matters most." With one final glance at her team, who were preparing their booths and talking to attendees, Emma walked to the stage. The audience was already seated, and the noise of the crowd faded as she approached the microphone. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady, though she could feel the nerves still swirling inside her. "I'm so glad you're here today. This summit isn't just about talking about mental health. It's about breaking the silence, starting real conversations, and supporting each other as we navigate this journey together." She paused, looking around at the sea of faces before her. "When we started Voices of Change, we were just a small group of people who wanted to make a difference. We were fighting for the right to be heard, the right to be seen, and the right to say, it's okay not to be okay. And as we've grown, we've learned that no matter where you come from, no matter what your struggles have been, you are never alone." The crowd was silent, listening intently. Emma could feel their collective energy, the shared desire to make real change. This summit is about all of us coming together, not just as individuals, but as a community. And when we stand together, we are stronger. This movement isn't just about Voices of Change, it's about all of you. The people who have shown up, who have shared their stories, and who have supported one another every step of the way. As Emma continued to speak, she felt her nerves melt away, replaced by a sense of purpose that filled her entire being. She wasn't just giving a speech. She was speaking for every person who had ever felt unheard, every person who had ever struggled alone. She was speaking for the community that had become a lifeline for so many. "Today, we are here to continue that work," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We're here to listen, to learn, and to build something better. But we can only do it together. So, let's make today a day of real change. Let's make it a day that sparks something bigger than any of us." The room erupted into applause, and Emma felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. This wasn't just a speech. It was the culmination of years of hard work, struggle, and passion. It was a moment that would define the future of Voices of Change. Over the next few hours, the summit progressed with panel discussions, workshops, and networking sessions. Emma joined several of the panels, speaking on the importance of mental health awareness and the need for continued advocacy. Her words resonated with everyone in the room, as they shared their own experiences and connected on a deeper level. Keanu was by her side through it all, offering quiet support as she navigated the event with ease. Despite the challenges and doubts she had faced in the past, Emma now felt a sense of belonging and purpose that was stronger than ever. As the summit came to a close, the impact was clear. People were leaving the event with new ideas, new connections, and a renewed sense of hope. Emma felt proud of everything they had accomplished, but more than that, she felt grateful for the community they had built together. Weeks passed, and the ripple effect of the summit continued to grow. The mental health resources they had created began to reach more and more people in underserved communities, and Emma's inbox was flooded with messages of thanks from individuals who had been touched by their work. But with success came new challenges. The demand for their services and support was growing faster than Emma had anticipated. There were new partnerships to explore, new initiatives to launch, and new teams to hire. Emma found herself balancing the growth of Voices of Change with her own personal life, something that had become increasingly difficult as the pressure mounted. Keanu noticed the strain. One evening, as they were winding down after a long day of work, he looked at Emma with concern. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. "You've been working nonstop. I can see it." Emma sighed, rubbing her eyes. "I know. It's just, there's so much to do. I'm trying to keep up with everything, but I'm starting to feel like I'm losing control. I want to keep helping, but I don't know how much longer I can keep up at this pace." Keanu reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. You don't have to do it all alone. You've built a team of people who are just as passionate about this as you are. It's okay to lean on them, and it's okay to ask for help when you need it. You're not a machine, Emma. You're human. Emma let out a breath, her shoulders relaxing. You're right. I've been so focused on making this work that I've forgotten to take care of myself. Maybe it's time I started to do that. Keanu smiled warmly. You're doing amazing things, but you can't pour from an empty cup. You deserve to take care of yourself, too. The following days were a turning point for Emma. She made the conscious decision to delegate more, trusting her team to handle the responsibilities that she had once felt compelled to do herself. She also made time for herself, to rest, to reflect, and to reconnect with the reasons she had started this journey in the first place. With Keanu's support and the strength of her team, Emma realized that she didn't have to do everything on her own. The power of voices of change came from the collective efforts of all the people involved, and it was only through mutual support, within her team and the community, that they could continue to grow and make a real difference. As Emma looked out over the horizon, she felt ready for whatever the future held. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but she knew that, together, they would continue to make a lasting impact. Voices of Change was no longer just a campaign, it was a movement, and its story was just beginning. The world had changed since the summit. Voices of Change was not just another campaign. It was a movement that had touched the hearts of people across the country. Emma's inbox was a constant flow of gratitude and encouragement, her social media platforms filled with stories of triumph and heartache from those whose lives had been affected by the work she and her team had done. Yet, despite all the progress, Emma knew that with success came the inevitable pressure to maintain it. The weight of responsibility felt heavier now, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. One crisp autumn morning, Emma was sitting at her desk, going over the numbers from the latest outreach program, when an email caught her eye. It was from a journalist who wanted to interview her for a feature on the impact of Voices of Change. Emma, I've been following your work for months, and I'd love to learn more about the vision behind the campaign. I'm particularly interested in the challenges you've faced and how you've managed to keep it all going. Looking forward to hearing from you. Emma couldn't deny the excitement she felt at the thought of getting more exposure for the campaign, but a knot tightened in her stomach. This would be a big deal. This kind of attention could elevate the movement to a whole new level, but it also meant even more scrutiny. She'd be expected to answer questions she wasn't sure she had answers to. Her mind raced as she thought about it. Could she keep up with the expectations? Could Voices of Change continue to grow without losing sight of its core mission? She had already made so many sacrifices. What more would be asked of her? Keanu could tell something was bothering Emma when she walked into the office that afternoon. She had that same distant look in her eyes that she got when she was overthinking something. "Hey," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What's going on?" Emma took a deep breath, glancing at the email once again. "It's this interview request. It's great, I know, but I don't know if I'm ready for the kind of attention it's going to bring. I feel like there's so much at stake now, and I'm not sure I can handle it. What if I mess up? What if people start to question whether I'm really doing enough?" Keanu sat down beside her, his voice calm but firm. "Emma, you've been doing this for how long now? You've faced challenges bigger than most people could even imagine. If anyone can handle this, it's you. But what if I don't have all the answers?" Emma's voice wavered slightly. "What if I fail to live up to everyone's expectations? I've been so focused on doing everything right, but now I feel like I'm just holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop." Keanu gave her a gentle smile. "Listen, no one expects you to have it all figured out. Not even you. And that's okay. The important thing is that you're doing your best, and that's all anyone can ask for. You're human, Emma. You don't have to have every answer. Just be real with them. That's what makes your message so powerful." Emma looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. It had always been the authenticity of Voices of Change that had resonated with people. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was simply trying to make a difference. The pressure had always been there, but now, it felt like it was suffocating her. "I just want to keep helping people," she whispered. "I don't want to lose sight of that." "You won't," Keanu reassured her. "You've already made a difference, and you will continue to do so, no matter how big or small. The heart of this campaign is in the stories, the connections, and the real people you've touched. And you'll never lose that. You don't need to be perfect. The next morning, after some reflection, Emma decided to go ahead with the interview. She wasn't sure exactly what the future held, but she knew she couldn't let her fears hold her back. She was ready to face whatever came next. The interview was scheduled for that afternoon, and Emma found herself standing in front of a small group of reporters, her hands a little clammy as she took her seat. The journalist leading the interview, a woman named Sarah, smiled warmly at her. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Emma," Sarah began. "Your work has clearly had a huge impact on the mental health community, and we're so excited to dive deeper into your journey." Emma smiled nervously. "Thank you for having me. It's honestly humbling to see how far Voices of Change has come. I never imagined it would become what it is today." Sarah's next question was more direct. "You've had incredible success, but with success comes challenges. What would you say has been the most difficult part of this journey?" Emma paused, taking a deep breath before answering. "The most difficult part has been learning how to balance everything. At first, it was just me and a few people working late into the night, trying to get this thing off the ground. But as we've grown, the responsibilities have multiplied, and it's been a real challenge to not lose sight of the original mission. There have been moments where I've doubted myself, wondering if I can keep up with the expectations. But at the end of the day, it's not about perfection. It's about staying true to the message and the people we're serving." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And with that growth comes even more pressure, I assume. How do you cope with the weight of it all?" Emma smiled wryly. "Honestly, I don't always cope well. I'm still learning. But I've surrounded myself with an amazing team who share the same vision and support me in ways I never expected. It's not just about me anymore. It's about all of us. And that's made a world of difference." As the interview continued, Emma felt more at ease. She spoke candidly about the highs and lows of the journey, the importance of mental health, and the ways in which Voices of Change had impacted the lives of individuals. But the most profound moment came when Sarah asked her about the future. "What's next for you in Voices of Change?" Sarah asked. "What do you hope to achieve in the years to come?" Emma took a moment to think, her eyes drifting to the large windows behind her, where the sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees outside. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. "I want to keep growing. I want to keep reaching people who need a place to be heard, a space to share their stories. We've made so much progress, but the work isn't over. There are still so many people out there who are struggling in silence. And as long as I have breath in my lungs, I'll keep fighting to make sure they have a voice." As Emma finished her statement, a wave of clarity washed over her. This wasn't just about the work. It was about the mission, and that mission would always remain her true north. After the interview, Emma left the office with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of the interview, the pressure, and the expectations still lingered, but it no longer felt suffocating. For the first time in months, Emma could breathe freely. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to do everything perfectly. She just had to stay true to the heart of Voices of Change and keep moving forward. And as she looked out over the city skyline that evening, Emma knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready. Because no matter how uncertain the future might be, she would always have the strength to carry the message of hope and healing forward. The months following the interview had been a whirlwind. The exposure from the media, the summit, and the continued success of Voices of Change brought both new opportunities and new challenges. Emma was more focused than ever on expanding the movement, but also more aware of the balance she needed to maintain. While the pressure to do it all was immense, she had learned to lean into the team she had built and trust in the people around her. Keanu, especially, had been her steady anchor throughout it all. As the year came to a close, Emma found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken. From the day she was kicked out of the airport, to the struggles and breakthroughs, to the summit that had solidified Voices of Change as a national movement. She was proud of what they had accomplished, but there was still so much more to do. The journey was far from over. One quiet afternoon, as Emma sat in her office going over the final plans for their next initiative, an outreach program aimed at schools to educate younger generations on mental health, she received a call. It was from Sarah, the journalist who had interviewed her months ago. "Emma, how are you? I wanted to follow up on the feature we did on Voices of Change," Sarah said, her voice warm and familiar. "I know things have been busy, but I'd love to chat and hear how everything is going. Would you be available for another conversation?" Emma's first instinct was to smile. It felt good to be asked to check in, rather than just provide an update. "Of course. I'd love to." A few days later, Sarah arrived at Emma's office. This time, the atmosphere felt different, lighter. Emma had grown more comfortable in her role, and though the challenges were still ever present, she had found a new sense of purpose in her work. She greeted Sarah with a hug, and they sat down in the same conference room where their last interview had taken place. "You seem different," Sarah remarked, sipping her coffee as she looked at Emma. "More centered, I guess?" Emma laughed softly, nodding. "I think I've finally found my rhythm. It's been a journey, for sure, but I've learned that it's okay to not have it all figured out. I've accepted that the process is ongoing, and that's where the real growth happens." Sarah smiled, her pen ready in hand. "That's exactly what I want to talk about today, growth. Not just in terms of Voices of Change, but in you. You've had such an incredible journey. How has all this changed you personally?" Emma thought about the question for a moment. "I think, in the beginning, I was driven by this fear of failure. Fear that if I didn't succeed, it would mean I wasn't good enough. But over time, I've come to realize that failure is part of the process. The most important thing is that I keep going. I've learned that it's okay to not have all the answers, that sometimes growth comes in the quiet moments, when you step back and take a breath." Sarah nodded, impressed by Emma's candidness. "And what about Voices of Change? How has it evolved, and where do you see it going in the future?" Emma leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "Voices of Change has grown into something I never imagined possible. What started as a small idea, a passion project, has turned into a movement that's touching lives across the country. I think what makes it so special is that it's built on real stories, real people. We've built a community that feels like a family, and it's that bond that makes us strong." She paused, her voice growing even more focused. "As for the future, we're just getting started. I want to keep expanding, reach even more people, especially the younger generation. I want mental health to be something that's talked about openly, without shame. I want to make sure that every person who's struggling knows that they are not alone." Later that evening, after Sarah had left, Emma sat in her office staring out the window at the city lights. She thought about how far they had come, how much Voices of Change had touched lives. She remembered her first steps into the world of mental health advocacy, when she was still uncertain, still doubting her ability to make a real difference. Now, she was standing on the edge of something bigger than she had ever imagined. Keanu walked into her office with a cup of tea in hand. He leaned against the doorframe, a soft smile on his face. "You did great today," he said. "I could tell you felt more at ease." Emma nodded, taking the tea gratefully. "Yeah, it feels like everything's come full circle. I've been so focused on the destination that I forgot to appreciate how far we've come." Keanu joined her at the desk, sitting beside her. "You've been amazing, and look at all the lives you've touched. Voices of Change is your legacy, Emma. It's going to keep growing, and it's going to continue changing lives for years to come." Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my anchor through all of this, Keanu. I don't think I say it enough, but I appreciate you." Keanu smiled, his eyes soft. "You don't have to say it. I know. We're in this together." As the days passed, Emma's vision for Voices of Change continued to expand. They launched the school outreach program, which was met with overwhelming support. The initiative provided resources to educators, helping them foster open discussions about mental health with students, and the response from both teachers and students was incredibly positive. Emma felt that this was the beginning of something truly transformative. By reaching young people, she could help change the conversation around mental health for future generations. But even as Emma found success in her work, she never lost sight of the lessons she had learned along the way. She wasn't just trying to build a movement. She was trying to build a community, a place where people could come together and heal together. That was the heart of Voices of Change. And as the year came to a close, Emma found herself thinking back to the day she had been kicked out of the airport, the moment when everything had seemed like it was falling apart. It was hard to imagine then that it would lead to this. But she had learned something important through it all. The toughest times often lead to the most rewarding journeys. Every struggle, every setback had shaped her, and had shaped Voices of Change into what it was today. As Emma looked to the future, she knew there would be more obstacles to overcome, but she was no longer afraid of them. She had built something meaningful, something real, and as long as she stayed true to the mission and to the people who had supported her along the way, she knew that the work would continue. The story of Voices of Change was far from over. It was just beginning, and Emma was ready for whatever came next.